You notice the wallet before you notice the man. A quiet European station in 1961 hums around you with the soft, unbothered rhythm of early morning. Yet the small leather shape near Gate 9 refuses to blend into the floor's pale stone. It lies there as though placed, not dropped, the way a lone glove or handkerchief sometimes appears in mystery novels. But this wallet has weight in its stillness, a faint aura of decision rather than accident. When you lift it, the leather feels cool, deliberate, and older than the scuffs on its corners suggest. A name is embossed inside, but something about it feels borrowed, as if the letters are only renting space rather than belonging to it. You look around instinctively, expecting someone to rush back to apologize, to claim it, with the relieved smile strangers give one another in moments like this. No one turns, no one even slows. The station simply exhales, and the wallet remains in your hand, patient as a question. You let the noise wash past you as the moment softens. The train boards quietly, the air settles, and your breath finds its slower rhythm again. Whatever stirred your curiosity a moment ago doesn't have to hurry you now. You simply stand there beneath the station's muted lights, letting the quiet fold over the strangeness like a blanket. You slip the wallet into your coat pocket and step away from Gate 9, telling yourself you'll turn it in at the small security office tucked between the ticket counter and the old wooden kiosk that never seems to be open. Yet, as you walk, the faint weight against your chest nudges at you as if it wants to be noticed again. Something about the leather feels inconsistent, worn yet unused, aged yet untouched by any real hand. It draws your attention the way forgotten stories do, softly, patiently, without force. You find yourself wondering who the owner might be, what kind of morning they're having, whether they realized the wallet had gone missing, or if they meant for someone, perhaps even you, to find it. The Cold War hums quietly beneath the ordinary world, but you don't feel threatened by the thought. Just curious the way anyone might be when life offers a riddle wrapped in something as mundane as a misplaced billfold. Before we drift deeper into this forgotten story, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss a secret. The Cold War tried to hide in the dark. You don't open the wallet right away. You tell yourself there's no need, that the contents can wait until you reach the small evidence desk tucked behind the station's shuttered kiosk. But as you walk, the weight presses lightly against your coat, settling into a steady rhythm with each step. And before long, the temptation becomes a soft whisper that drifts along the quiet corridor. You pause beneath a dim light, one of those old bulbs with a warm filament glow that makes even the coldest mornings feel like a lingering ember. The station's tiled wall reflects a muted shimmer as you ease the wallet open, careful not to disturb more than necessary. Inside, the usual things look back at you: a few paper notes, a folded card, the faint scent of leather rising like dust from an attic. Yet something feels displaced, as though the wallet has its own small gravity pulling your attention toward a seam along the inner lining. You press your thumb gently there, and the leather gives ever so slightly. The sensation is subtle enough to ignore, but curiosity has its own quiet momentum. You ease a fingernail beneath the seam, expecting perhaps a loose thread or a bit of miscut fabric. Instead, the lining lifts like a page, revealing a faintly glimmering square beneath it. For a moment you hesitate. The station around you hums with distant announcements, the soft rolling of wheels, the rustle of coats, ordinary sounds that contrast the extraordinary secret hidden in this quiet fold. With a breath you didn't realize you were holding, you slide the object free. It's a photograph small enough to fit beneath the lining, but not so small that the effort seems natural. The paper feels older than the wallet, older even than the year stamped on the station's newest timetable. Light dances across its surface as you angle it toward the bulb overhead, At first, you see only shadows and blurred shapes, as though the image had been taken in haste. But as your eyes adjust, the faint outlines sharpen. Two figures stand beneath a heavy archway, the stone around them dusted with what looks like early winter frost. One figure's face is turned slightly away, obscured, but unmistakably familiar in posture, someone high-ranking perhaps, or simply confident in their presence. The other figure faces the camera more directly, but their expression is softened by the grain of the image, making them look half real, half remembered. You feel the photograph's chill seep into your fingers, even though the station's heater hums nearby. What draws the breath from you is not the setting or the figures, but the familiarity of the moment. You've seen this archway before, not in person, but in quietly circulated intelligence briefings that were never meant for broad eyes. A Soviet administrative building, if memory serves, though the details were always vague, as if the building itself didn't particularly want to be identified. According to official records, the man whose name is embossed inside the wallet never traveled anywhere near that structure. In fact, he was supposedly a clerk for a modest trade office, the sort of role that rarely involves frost-covered midnight meetings under unmarked arches. A soft, unintended laugh escapes you, barely more than a warm breath in the station's chill air. It's the first of the day, and it startles you for its own simplicity. It feels good to break the tension, even if only slightly. You lean against the wall, letting the hum of the station fade into something like a lullaby. The photograph rests between your fingers like a story refusing to begin too quickly. There's an odd detail along the edge, tiny speckled dots that shouldn't be part of the print. At first you assume they're just dust or damage from time, but when you brush your thumb across them, the texture surprises you. They're raised almost like the remnants of an early attempt at microdot encoding, though it would be an unusually clumsy one. The Cold War has no shortage of strange inventions, but this feels both too crude and too elaborate to be typical. You find yourself wondering whether the dots were meant to be seen, or whether someone hoped they never would be. The uncertainty settles over you like a thin mist. As you tuck the photograph back into the wallet's lining, a small callback flickers in your mind, the way the leather had felt too old and yet too new earlier, as though the wallet were made to look used without ever having lived a real day. Now, with the photograph hidden inside, that contradiction feels less accidental. It's as if the wallet had been crafted around its secrets, rather than simply chosen to carry them. You press the lining closed, smoothing the fold back into place, and the wallet looks ordinary again. There's something quietly impressive about how quickly it disguises itself. If you weren't holding it, you'd never suspect it had anything to hide. You make your way to the evidence desk, though your steps are slower now, drifting into the kind of thoughtful rhythm that invites old memories to surface. You once heard a technician joke that Cold War intelligence work was like archaeology, except no one knew what was buried or why anyone thought to bury it in the first place. It was a soft joke, harmless and oddly comforting, and it floats back to you now as you weave through the thinning station crowd. You smile at the memory, recognizing how easily humor slips into even the quietest investigations, like a warm light through a frosted window. The evidence office is dim and nearly empty, as if the people inside it rely more on instinct than on illumination. A single clerk looks up when you step in, their expression neutral but not unfriendly. You place the wallet gently on the desk, but something in you hesitates before sliding it across. You're not sure why. Perhaps it's the photograph. Perhaps it's the seam. Perhaps it's the faint sense that the story has only just begun to unfurl, like a reel of tape catching on its spool before finding its pace. The clerk opens the wallet, scans the contents, and raises an eyebrow at the worn exterior. Nowhere where it should be, they murmur softly, almost to themselves. You don't comment. There's no need. The wallet will reveal itself in its own time if it wants to. You step back, letting the office settle again, and drift toward the window overlooking the tracks. Outside, a small plume of winter fog curls along the platform, catching the light in soft silver streaks. Trains come and go. Ordinary passengers moving through ordinary days, unaware of the small, unfolding mystery that rests just a few rooms behind them. You exhale slowly, letting the moment stretch. The photograph lingers in your mind, the blurred faces, the quiet archway, the frost haloing the figures like hesitant ghosts. You try to imagine the meeting that never officially took place, and why someone would hide its single surviving image inside a wallet lined with deliberate secrecy. The possibilities drift through your thoughts, like snowflakes, each one forming and dissolving before landing. You don't chase them. Not yet. Sometimes the Cold War reveals itself best when you give it room to breathe. Still, one question refuses to loosen its grip. If the photograph was meant to remain hidden, why was the wallet left at Gate 9 at all? The idea loops back to you as gently as a whispered reminder. Perhaps the owner didn't leave it by mistake. Perhaps the wallet wanted to be found. And if that's true, then the photograph beneath the lining isn't just a relic, it's an invitation. You leave the evidence office with that thought settling into your coat like a second lining, faint but persistent. Outside, the station's quiet rhythm continues, soft enough to soothe, steady enough to carry you into whatever the next discovery might be. And as the memory of the photograph drifts through your mind, you feel the calm certainty that this story will not end here. Not while questions still sleep beneath the surface, waiting to open their eyes. You return to the station the next morning with the quiet expectation that the wallet will already feel like a closed matter, the sort of oddity that briefly brightens a routine day and then dissolves into the background hum of a world already full of stranger things. But as you approach the evidence office, the air in the corridor has shifted. It isn't tense tension, rarely shows its face here, but rather muted, as if the building itself is holding its breath. When the door swings open, you see the clerk from yesterday, standing beside a small table where the wallet lies open once more, its contents arranged with the same care one uses when handling delicate film negatives. They glance at you, not with surprise, but with a quiet acknowledgement that something was always going to draw you back. The clerk motions you closer and taps a single object near the wallet's spine. A rectangle of faded paper, slightly curled, the ink feathered by time, rests beneath the overhead lamp. You recognize it immediately as a tram ticket, the type issued in cities trying to hold themselves together with timetables and hope. There's a neat stamp on one edge, the kind that once might have felt crisp under a conductor's hand, but now looks softened by age. This wasn't visible yesterday, the clerk murmurs, though the words sound more like a thought than a report. You lean in, the station's quiet settling around you like snowfall. The ticket's origin catches your breath. The city printed on the upper margin is one you've never associated with the wallet's supposed owner. According to the identification card, still resting inside its sleeve like an obedient actor waiting for its cue, the man had never lived there. Never passed through, never written as much as a postcard from its streets. You remember the stamped birth date, the trade office designation, the tiny inked signature that felt too careful to belong to a clerk who handled mundane paperwork. Now this tram ticket lies before you, like a small contradiction, trivial yet insistent. You reach out, lifting it with the same delicacy you'd afford a fragile leaf. The clerk shifts beside you, their voice softening. Look at the date. You angle the paper under the lamp, and the numbers sharpen. The tram ride occurred on a day that stirs a faint memory, something about a classified checkpoint breach, a minor one in the grand scope of Cold War incidents. but significant enough to cause a ripple of whispered reports across desks like this one. You remember hearing the older analysts refer to it as an invisible day, the sort of event that officially never happened, except in the tired eyes of those who had to explain why it nearly had. The coincidence is almost too on the nose, like a mystery novel taking itself a little too seriously. You let out a quiet breath that becomes a soft laugh, surprised again by how humor slips into moments that don't seem to invite it. You turn the ticket over expecting perhaps more clues, or perhaps nothing at all. Instead, you find a faint smudge of graphite near the bottom corner. Not a scribble or notation, just the smallest trace of handwriting worn nearly invisible. The marking is almost accidental, the type of remnant that happens when someone holds an object too long with a pencil tucked between their fingers. Yet something about it seems intentional, a tiny shadow left behind on purpose. You feel a pull of curiosity that settles into your chest, like a warm ember. You wonder for a moment whether the graphite could match the handwriting from the grocery list found later. Though of course you remind yourself that list belongs to a moment still beyond your horizon. And yet the possibility drifts into your thoughts, like a small callback from a story not yet fully told. You dismiss it gently, but the thought lingers in the air, quiet as breath. The clerk steps away to retrieve a magnifier, leaving you alone with the ticket's secretive presence. You let your mind wander to the city printed on the top line, imagining its trams rattling through narrow streets, their windows fogged by winter breath. A place bustling with hurried residents, each carrying their own secrets, while pretending their lives were ordinary. And perhaps in the midst of those crowds, someone who wasn't supposed to be there stood waiting for a tram that arrived late, wearing a coat stitched with unfamiliar intentions. You picture the moment as if you were there watching from a doorway, the cold pressing in like a quiet reminder of the world's delicate balance. When the magnifier returns, you bring it to the ticket's corner and breathe slowly as the graphite mark sharpens beneath the lens. It's not a letter, not a symbol you recognize. More of a fragment, like the lower curve of a number or a beginning stroke of an incomplete thought. It offers nothing concrete, yet it refuses to be dismissed. The ambiguity feels deliberate, as if the ticket wanted to provide just enough of a hint to keep you leaning forward. It's almost polite in its uncertainty. You glance again at the date. The checkpoint breach was never discussed openly, but you recall whispers of an unidentified individual slipping through the perimeter, a person later described only in the vaguest terms, like a reflection seen through frosted glass. The officials never confirmed anything, and the reports were quickly folded into silence. Now, with the tram ticket resting only inches from the wallet that seems to rewrite its own history each time it's opened, the memory resurfaces with unnerving clarity. You smooth the ticket gently onto the table, careful not to disturb its brittle edges. The clerk watches you for a moment, brows knit in quiet curiosity. Strange how these things appear, they say. You nod, though the word appear feels almost too generous. It's as if the objects inside the wallet choose their own timing, unveiling themselves slowly, allowing the mystery to breathe in rhythm with your own pulse. You feel a curious comfort in that the way a story chooses when it wants to be told. You decide to step outside the office for a moment, letting the air of the corridor sweep the lingering questions from your thoughts. The morning light pours through the tall windows, illuminating the faint dust suspended in stillness. You walk toward the far end of the platform, listening to the muted clatter of a departing train. Somewhere in that sound, you sense the echo of the tram ticket's journey, a path that may never have existed at all, yet somehow feels inevitable now that you've seen it. As you lean against a railing, a soft breeze carries the scent of coal and old wood blending with the station's gentle hum. You think again about the wallet, the photograph hidden beneath its lining, the tram ticket quietly insisting on its own impossible story. The pieces feel disjointed like mismatched fragments from different puzzles, yet they share the same air, the same quiet gravity. You realize that the more you discover, the more the wallet seems to unspool its secrets in subtle threads, careful not to overwhelm, always guiding, never pushing. A question rises within you, one without urgency, but with a persistent calm. If the ticket was tucked away so carefully, why reveal itself now? Perhaps the wallet was waiting for someone who would notice, someone who wouldn't simply glance at the date and dismiss it as coincidence. The idea is almost flattering, though you remind yourself not to let the mystery charm you too easily. Yet, as a soft joke drifts into your mind, something about wallets having better timing than most trains, you smile despite yourself. You return to the evidence office with renewed clarity, the station's quiet, offering a strange reassurance. Inside, the clerk has begun logging the ticket into the neatly ruled ledger, each stroke of ink measured and steady. You watch for a moment, feeling the calm flow of the room wrap itself around you. The wallet rests nearby, its leather still and composed as though waiting for its next quiet revelation. As you turn to leave, the light catches the tram ticket one last time. The faint graphite mark glints ever so slightly beneath the lamp, and you feel the lingering certainty that this tiny fragment, this humble slip of paper, is more than an anomaly. It is a thread leading somewhere not yet charted, somewhere the Cold War never intended for you to follow. And yet you feel drawn onward, your curiosity a gentle tide guiding you deeper into the unfolding quiet of a story that has only just begun to reveal its shape. You arrive at the station the following morning with a strange sense of anticipation, as though the quiet air itself has begun to expect you. The world outside still carries the pale hush of early light, and the tiled corridors seem to echo the memory of yesterday's discoveries. The evidence office door sits slightly ajar, letting a narrow beam of muted gold stretch across the floor, like a path you've already chosen without realizing it. When you step inside, the clerk from the previous days glances up with a look that hovers somewhere between relief and curiosity, as if your arrival answers a question they hadn't dared to ask aloud. The wallet rests open on the center table, immaculate as ever, despite the number of times it has been handled. Today, the identification card lies beside it, positioned neatly atop a pale folder. Something about the arrangement feels ceremonial, like the beginning of a quiet performance. The clerk clears their throat softly and gestures for you to come closer. "We ran the name," they say. The words come out slow, careful, softened by the hum of the office's old radiator. There's nothing. Not a file. Not a birth record. Not a military draft notation. Not even a misspelled alternate. You look down at the identification card. It appears legitimate, lamination, clean fonts, correct seals, exactly where they should be. It is the kind of document that would pass casual inspection without a second thought. The photograph stares back with an expression so neutral, it almost feels intentional, as if the face were designed to be forgotten moments after being seen. You study the eyes, the line of the jaw, the faint shadow near the collar that might suggest a habitual tilt of the head. Yet nothing about the image hints at a person who should not exist. The clerk hands you a thin report sheet, its typewriting crisp, despite the ribbon's occasional faintness. You read the lines once, then again, letting the details settle. Every database the office could access returned the same result: no record. Even cross-referencing similar names offered nothing but distant mismatches, men who lived in different cities, worked in unrelated professions, or bore slight differences in age and appearance. The man in the photograph seemed to hover in an empty space between realities present only in this single card. A soft joke brushes your thoughts, something about how some people dream of being unforgettable, while this man seems to have gone professional at disappearing. You keep the humor to yourself, but the faint smile lingers, warming the cool stillness of the office. Perhaps the Cold War had simply encouraged everyone to become a little too comfortable with ghosts. You trace your fingertips lightly along the card's edges. The lamination feels slightly thicker than standard, a detail so subtle that most would overlook it. You hold the card up to the light, and the glare catches a faint distortion beneath the surface, as if the photograph had been pressed onto another image that once lived there. You tilt it slightly, and for a moment the outline beneath the laminate shifts. Not a different face, not even a distinct shape, just the suggestion of something that was once altered or replaced. A tiny ripple of uncertainty drifts across your mind. The clerk watches this quietly, their gaze following the card's movement, like an archivist observing an artifact that refuses to settle into a single era. "We thought it might be a printing defect," they murmur, "but the anomaly is too deliberate. Almost like a layer was removed." You nod, though the idea unsettles you more than you expected. Removing identity is far simpler than creating it, and this card seems to have done both with an elegance that contradicts its fundamentally simple appearance. A memory rises unbidden, an older analyst once mentioning in a half-joking tone that the most suspicious identities were always the ones that appeared too ordinary. Documents that brought no attention to themselves tended to travel the farthest. Perhaps that was the intention here, a man designed to slip through checkpoints unnoticed, a name meant to exist only long enough to serve a singular purpose. But then a lingering thought settles in: if the name was meant to be untraceable, why embed it so neatly into a wallet left deliberately behind? You drift toward the window, letting the office's soft light fall over the card again. Beyond the glass, the station platform glows with the gentle brightness of morning. People move through the space with unhurried cadence, each absorbed in the rhythm of their own day. You watch a traveler drop their glove, retrieve it without breaking stride, and continue toward their train. The world outside feels so ordinary, and perhaps that contrast heightens the oddity held within your hands. You return to the table, letting the stillness of the room coax your thoughts forward. Turning the identification card over, you notice a minute scuff near the lower corner, a faint abrasion, almost too small to matter. Yet it catches your attention in the same quiet way the tram ticket's graphite mark did. The scuff aligns perfectly with the shape of something circular, as though the card once pressed against a metal button or clasp. But the wallet's inner pocket doesn't contain any hardware capable of making such a mark. You stroke the texture gently, considering whether the card had been transferred, perhaps moved from another container, before it reached this wallet at all. You return the card to the table and study the name printed there, letting each letter dissolve into the quiet rhythm of your breathing. The lettering is precise, unfaltering, printed with a steady hand, and the typeface typically used for official documentation in this region. And yet the longer you look, the more the name begins to feel like an approximation of authenticity rather than the real thing. It is as though the creators sat down with a blank space and asked themselves what an ordinary European name from this era should feel like, then wrote their answer down with impeccable neatness. The effect is strangely uncanny, like a painting so realistic you don't trust it. The clerk breaks the silence first. "What do you make of it?" Their tone remains gentle, not demanding an answer, so much as granting you permission to think aloud. You take a moment before responding, letting the words collect themselves in the calm spaces of your mind. You say softly that the card feels like a mirror, one reflecting something absent rather than present, a placeholder for a person who may have existed or may never have existed, or may have worn the identity only briefly, like a coat borrowed for a single winter evening. Your thoughts wander to the photograph beneath the wallets lining its frost-covered archway and ghosted figures. The memory of that blurred second face lingers, an uneasy reminder that identities can shift in ways ordinary documentation cannot capture. The two images, the altered identification card and the hidden photograph, begin to form a quiet conversation in your mind. Perhaps the wallet didn't belong to the man in the photograph, or perhaps it belonged to him and to someone else at different times in different forms. The ambiguity wraps itself around you like a slow-moving fog. As you ponder this, the office phone rings with a single muted trill, then stops before the clerk can answer. The sound leaves a faint vibration in the air, too brief to be suspicious, yet peculiar enough to stir a small ripple of unease. The clerk frowns, glancing toward the receiver, but dismisses it with a shrug. Probably a cross-line, they say. Happens often. You nod, though. Something about the timing feels oddly synchronized with the moment the name on the card began to unsettle you. You take one last look at the identification card, observing how calmly it rests against the pale folder, as though unaware it has betrayed its own non-existence. You place it gently back into the wallet, letting the leather fold around it with practiced ease. The wallet closes smoothly, far too smoothly, for something carrying such contradictions. You feel once again that strange sensation that the wallet understands the rhythm of its own secrets, choosing when to open and when to remain silent. As you step out of the office, the station's ambient hum embraces you with reassuring warmth. Outside, the trains continue to arrive and depart with the predictable cadence of a world that believes in timetables. You walk along the corridor, your thoughts drifting between the layers of identity you've encountered. Names without histories, photographs without clarity, details without resolution. And beneath it all lies a single lingering uncertainty. If the man in the identification card never existed, then who carried the wallet, and why did they leave it where you would find it? The question lingers at your side, like a quiet companion, neither urgent nor dismissible, guiding you deeper into a story that continues to reveal itself in patient, measured breaths. You return to the evidence office the next day with the growing sense that the wallet is no longer just an object waiting to be examined, but a quiet participant in its own unfolding. The station feels different now, not dangerous, not tense, simply watchful. The walls seem to absorb more than their share of silence, and even the light slipping through the tall windows carries a kind of muted patience, as though it already knows what you are coming to discover. When you enter the office, the clerk is leaning over the table, brows drawn, the wallet once again open like a book offering new pages. They straighten when you approach, sliding a small folded slip of paper toward you. It is worn, softened by the oils of handling, yet not creased in the way a frequently used list would be. You recognize it immediately as a grocery list, nothing more elaborate than a few items written in neat, unhurried script. Bread matches, apples, soap, ink, the kinds of words a person might jot down without much thought during an ordinary morning. But the clerk's expression tells you there is nothing ordinary about this list. Look closely, they murmur, and their tone carries the same softness you've come to associate with the quiet moments of discovery. You lift the list gently, feeling the paper's surprising thickness. The handwriting is clean, almost elegant, the letters sloping with a confidence that suggests the writer was accustomed to keeping notes, maybe even reports. You follow the lines, slowly letting the rhythm of the script settle into your thoughts. There's a warmth to it, a personality hiding just beneath the penciled strokes. Something human that feels oddly comforting within the cold intricacies of the investigation. Then the clerk unfolds a second sheet, much larger, creased, and marked with faint stamps indicating it once belonged in a surveillance log. The page is dated 6 months earlier, originating from a monitoring post in Prague. The details are blurred at the edges, the ink smudged from age, but the handwriting along the margins remains surprisingly clear. Notes in the same looping script, written in the same pressure, the same deliberate hand. You compare the 2 pages, holding them at slightly different angles under the lamp. The resemblance is unmistakable. Whoever wrote the grocery list also annotated that surveillance log. You feel your breath slow, not out of fear, but out of the sudden awareness that the story you've been following has just slipped into a deeper layer. The grocery list seems almost amused by its own deception, an innocent facade for a hand that once recorded movements of unknown figures near a checkpoint on a fog-heavy night in Prague. A soft laugh stirs inside you, an involuntary reaction to the absurdity of it all. The Cold War has a peculiar sense of humor. Sometimes the most revealing clue hides itself in plain sight, disguised as an everyday reminder to buy soap. The clerk glances up at the sound of your laugh, their eyebrow lifting in a faint, curious arc. You simply shake your head, letting the moment dissolve back into the calm of the room. You place the 2 sheets side by side, letting your eyes drift between them. The slope of the letters, the way the writer presses slightly harder on downstrokes, the subtle flourish on the final curve of each word, it all lines up perfectly. Yet the implications refuse to settle neatly. What was a Prague surveillance operative doing, writing a grocery list tucked inside a wallet belonging to a man who, according to all official records, didn't exist? You feel a soft wave of uncertainty drift through you, but it is not unsettling. It is almost soothing, the way unresolved questions rarely hurry themselves in these kinds of stories. You lean forward, tracing one of the handwritten notes on the surveillance page. It references a figure seen near the Vltava River around dusk, walking with measured pace, wearing a coat described only as civilian, dark, unremarkable. A figure who paused beneath a street lamp as though waiting for something or someone before continuing onto a tram that wasn't on the schedule. The detail tugs faintly at your mind, as though echoing the curiosity stirred by the tram ticket earlier. You turn the grocery list over, and the faintest indentation catches your eye, as if the writer once pressed too hard, leaving behind the ghost of a word that didn't make it onto the final surface. You angle it toward the lamp, watching the indentation come alive in shallow relief. It's not a complete word. Just a curved line, a small diagonal stroke beside it. Yet something about it feels familiar, reminiscent of the incomplete graphite mark found on the tram ticket. The callback settles into your awareness with delicate ease, as though the objects inside the wallet are quietly nodding to one another. You test the indentation with your fingertip, feeling its slight depth. Whoever wrote this list wasn't casually jotting down supplies, they were thinking about something else. Perhaps remembering something else, the way one's hand sometimes betrays the mind's wandering. A grocery list that ended up inside a planted wallet seems far too purposeful to be accidental. The idea that the writer was someone meant to remain unseen slips gently into your thoughts, a whisper, rather than a revelation. You lower the list and allow the office to settle around you once more. The faint hum of the radiator blends with the occasional shuffling from the corridor. Everything feels suspended, weightless, as though the walls themselves are waiting to hear your interpretation. You take your time, thinking of the man in the identification card who never existed, the photograph beneath the lining showing a meeting that never officially occurred, the tram ticket from a city the wallet's owner supposedly never visited. And now this handwriting traveling farther than it should have, leaving traces where traces weren't meant to be. You look toward the window, letting the soft winter light wash across your thoughts. A train arrives in the distance, its brakes releasing a long, slow exhale that sounds almost like a sigh. You imagine the anonymous writer standing somewhere along a cold street, months earlier, pencil in hand, recording movements they were never supposed to witness. Then imagine that same hand writing apples and bread, with the exact same precision perhaps on a day they needed to disappear into the simplicity of domestic life. The thought feels tender, unexpectedly human, settling into your chest with quiet warmth. The clerk voices a gentle question. Do you think the writer and the wallet's owner were the same person? You consider it for a long moment, then shake your head softly, not out of certainty, but out of the recognition that the Cold War never made such answers easy. Sometimes identities layered themselves so deeply that one person could appear as three or disappear into none at all. The ambiguity doesn't frustrate you. It soothes you the way a lullaby soothes, by never insisting on a single definitive meaning. You fold the grocery list again, carefully following the original lines, and place it beside the wallet. Its edges meet the leather perfectly, as though it always belonged there. Yet you know now that nothing in this wallet is what it appears to be. Everything inside is a thread woven into a tapestry that hides more than it reveals. You rest your hand on the table, letting the stillness settle around the moment. There is one lingering uncertainty circling your thoughts, the question of how handwriting travels. Not physically, but through purpose, through identity, through the quiet reach of someone who steps in and out of places without leaving a name behind. Perhaps the writer passed the wallet to someone else. Perhaps they retrieved it later. Or perhaps they wanted the list to be found, just as the photograph wanted to be found, just as the tram ticket quietly waited for the right page to turn. You feel the question settle into you without needing an answer. Then, with the calm ease of someone sinking into a dream, you step back from the table and breathe in the gentle quiet that fills the room. The mystery waits without urgency. The wallet rests without explanation. And you walk into the softly echoing corridor knowing that whatever reveals itself next will do so in its own time, like handwriting appearing in a place it has no logical reason to be. You arrive earlier than usual the next morning, drawn not by urgency, but by a gentle curiosity that has begun to weave itself into your daily rhythm. The station still wears its dawn hush, the kind of quiet that makes each sound feel like it was placed carefully, rather than simply occurring. When you step into the evidence office, the clerk is already there, leaning over the table with a look of concentrated stillness. The wallet rests open once more, its contents as orderly as ever, but today something unfamiliar lies beside it, a small folded square, delicate as pressed fabric. The clerk glances up, offering a subtle nod that conveys both greeting and invitation. Found this in the back fold, they say, their voice barely above a whisper. It didn't appear before. You smile softly, unsurprised. By now you've come to accept that the wallet reveals itself not through logic, but through timing, as though each new discovery waits patiently for the hour it prefers. You approach the table and unfold the square. It is a miniature tourist map, the sort handed out freely near museums or hotel desks. The paper is thin, the ink slightly faded, its corners softened by time. At first glance it appears harmless, a charming outline of city streets, landmarks, tram lines, and cafe districts. But you've already learned to look past first glances. You turn it over, slowly, tracing its creases with your fingertips. The bolder markings, circles around parks, arrows pointing toward monuments seem intended for casual travelers. Yet something about their neat symmetry feels rehearsed, like stage directions, rather than genuine notes. You study the typography, the light shading around canals, the small star marking a theater you've never heard of. It feels almost too curated. The clerk retrieves a small ultraviolet lamp from the shelf, moving with the relaxed familiarity of someone who understands the peculiarities of discovery. Try this, they suggest. You dim the desk lamp, letting a soft hush settle across the room. The ultraviolet glow washes over the map, and slowly, almost shyly, shapes begin to appear beneath the surface. Tiny lines drawn so faintly they almost hesitate to exist emerge along the map's edges. Not the bold curves of the tourist graphics, but thin, precise markings drawn with invisible ink. Several small circles appear, each a perfect ring, each placed over areas that offer no scenic interest at all. The clerk leans forward, squinting. "Those are embassy sectors," they whisper. Their voice is steady, but you can feel the quiet surprise beneath it. You examine the markings more carefully. 2 circles overlap slightly, forming the faint silhouette of a Venn diagram. A third sits off to the side, connected to the others by a short diagonal line. The pattern feels deliberate, almost mathematical, as though someone was charting intersections rather than locations. And then you notice something else. The ink glows with a faint bluish tint that you recognize from briefings years ago. An American formula used for covert marking during secure operations abroad. A soft, involuntary laugh escapes you, not one born of humor, but of appreciation. The Cold War had endless layers of innovation, some so subtle they seemed whimsical by modern standards. The clerk watches you, amusement flickering in their eyes. "I take it that glow means something," they say. You nod. "American ink," you reply softly. Pre-60s formula. Very specific. Not widely used, especially not in Europe. You fold the map gently, letting the knowledge settle. The man whose identification card belonged to no one was now linked to a map marked with American intelligence ink. Yet nothing about the wallet suggested an American origin. The leather, the lamination, the typography, all distinctly European. The contradictions stack themselves with astonishing grace, each detail resting lightly atop the next. You place the map beneath the lamp again, letting its glowing lines guide your thoughts. One circle in particular draws your eye, larger than the others, not centered on any building of official importance. Instead, it's positioned near a quiet residential street, the kind of place where nothing remarkable ever seems to happen. And yet, there it is, illuminated by ink meant for hidden communication. You try to imagine what might have occurred there: a rendezvous, a handoff, a simple observation of someone who never knew they were being observed. The possibilities drift softly through your mind. As you study the circles, a faint callback tugs at you, the curious lack of wear on the wallet itself. A wallet meant to appear old but carry no real history. Now paired with a map that hides its true markings beneath another layer, the idea takes on new meaning. Perhaps the wallet wasn't simply planted. Perhaps it was curated, crafted, to hold fragments of a story stitched together from multiple origins. That thought settles into you like a whisper, gentle, unhurried, quietly profound. You glance toward the window, where pale morning light paints the floor in long silver strokes. Outside, a train passes slowly, its wheels clicking in a rhythm that feels almost contemplative. You imagine the map's owner sitting on such a train, the folded paper tucked inside a coat pocket, its secrets glowing quietly against the fabric. A person traveling softly through the world, leaving behind traces not meant to be discovered, at least not by accident. The clerk clears their throat, bringing you back to the moment. "There's something else," they say. They hand you a loop, small, circular, meant for close inspection. You position it over one of the ultraviolet circles, and your eyes slowly adjust to the magnified image. Beneath the glowing ring lies a tiny cluster of dots, arranged with too much intention to be blemishes. Not Morse, not any common code you recognize. The pattern feels like a signature of sorts, an encoded identity perhaps, or a reference point known only to those meant to understand it. The uncertainty settles over you, but in a way that feels soothing rather than frustrating. The mystery isn't rushing you. It isn't demanding answers. It unfolds like snowfall, softly, steadily, each flake, a new detail landing gently atop the last. You lower the loop and allow your fingertips to rest lightly on the map's edges. The combination of American ink and European craftsmanship creates a contradiction that feels almost harmonious. A blurred identity, a misplaced tram ticket handwriting that traveled across cities, and now a map that glows with secrets only when asked politely. The wallet is beginning to feel like a conversation more than an object. You step back from the table, letting the hum of the radiator blend with the soft, rustling sounds from the corridor. The station beyond the office continues its ordinary life travelers, arriving with luggage porters, calling out small greetings, the world progressing, as though the Cold War were merely a distant weather pattern. Yet here in this quiet room, the past whispers in ultraviolet ink. You fold the map gently and place it back beside the wallet. It slips into the arrangement as though it had always belonged there despite its delayed appearance. And perhaps that's the wallet's real secret. It reveals nothing until the moment feels right, as though the story itself has an internal sense of pacing. You find comfort in that thought, an odd reassurance that some mysteries prefer to unfold at a human speed. As you prepare to leave, the clerk asks quietly, "Where do you think the ink came from?" You pause, letting the calm of the office settle around the question. Then you answer softly, "From someone who wanted to be understood only by the right eyes." The phrase lingers in the air, gentle and steady, as if it has been waiting there all along. You step into the station corridor, the map's glowing patterns still drifting in your thoughts like constellations. And as you walk, a single open question accompanies you with the steady quiet of a shadow. If the ink marks were meant for someone specific, what message were they trying to send, and why leave it in a wallet that was never meant to stay hidden? You find yourself returning to the station with the unhurried certainty of someone following a path that has already begun to reveal its own shape. The morning carries a muted chill, the kind that settles gently against your coat rather than urging you to rush. When you step into the evidence office, the atmosphere feels slightly rearranged, as though the room has taken a quiet breath since your last visit. The wallet sits open in its usual place, but today a single object rests beside it, small enough to overlook, ordinary enough to dismiss, yet placed with the deliberate care the clerk reserves only for discoveries that resist easy explanations. A paperclip. At first you don't understand why it deserves its own space on the table. It's unremarkable in shape, modest in size, bent only slightly at one end, as though someone once fidgeted with it absent-mindedly. But the clerk watches you with a steady gaze, waiting for the moment you'll see what they saw. You take a seat, leaning in, just enough for the quiet hum of the radiator to soften into the background. The paperclip glints faintly under the lamp, its metal catching the light in a way that feels too refined for such a simple object. "We tested it," the clerk murmurs almost apologetically, as if aware of how strange the sentence sounds. The alloy isn't standard. You raise an eyebrow just slightly, but the gesture is enough to make them continue. It's not the typical steel composite these were made from. There's a trace element, used mostly in high-security briefing rooms by American personnel stationed abroad. Their voice lowers, softening even further. It was never meant for public manufacture. You pick up the clip, carefully feeling its weight. It's lighter than expected, yet oddly firm between your fingers. Something about the texture carries a subtle granularity, like metal pressed under unusual conditions. You rotate it slowly, letting your fingertips explore the curve. The object feels foreign, yet familiar in the way Cold War artifacts often do ordinary shapes, hiding extraordinary intentions. You think briefly of the map marked in American ink, its faint ultraviolet glow still lingering in memory. Two subtle traces now both pointing westward, yet contained inside a wallet that insisted on presenting itself as European. The contradiction floats gently through your thoughts like a leaf drifting on still water. You take a quiet breath, letting the air settle in your chest. The clerk watches the movement of your hands with quiet curiosity. It was clipped to the lining, they say, inside the backfold, as if someone wanted it hidden, but not too hidden. You nod, considering the phrasing. Some secrets prefer to be discovered only by the right eyes and at the right time. You place the clip on the table once more, observing the slight bend in its frame. It's such a human gesture, the sort of damage caused by worry or thoughtfulness, by someone rolling the metal between their fingers during a long night or uneasy conversation. The thought feels unexpectedly intimate, bringing the unknown owner of the wallet a little closer. For a moment, you picture them seated at a dimly lit desk, paperwork, spread out the quiet turning of gears inside a world that demands silence as much as it demands precision. You examine the bent corner more closely. There's a faint darkening along the curve, almost like the trace of heat, though the probability seems small. The clerk leans in beside you. "We tested that too," they whisper. "Microscopic thermal distortion. Not enough to suggest a device, but enough to show it was once under stress." You imagine the clip pressed against a sealed envelope, perhaps, or used to fasten a folded directive passed between hands that never exchanged names. The possibilities drift softly, unhurried, settling only long enough to remind you how rarely objects tell straightforward stories. Your thoughts wander briefly to the grocery list, the handwriting that seemed to travel across borders with more confidence than its writer ever could. You remember the graphite traces, the indentation of a word unfinished. Now, as you study the paperclip, a faint connection begins to form, a sense of shared intention, as though each item inside the wallet was once part of a larger, invisible choreography. The grocery list carried the hand. The map carried the ink. And now the paperclip carries the metal, a material used in briefing rooms, where words were spoken softly but carried great weight. The details do not fit together neatly, but they do orbit the same center. You roll the clip between your fingers once more, testing its shape. It resists slightly, not in defiance, but in memory, holding the curve it once served. You feel the quiet echo of someone's hand there, their thoughts pressed into the metal. For a moment, you wonder whether such an object can remember in some small way the purpose it once served. The clerk breaks the silence with a soft clearing of the throat. "There's more," they say gently. They retrieve a small envelope from the desk drawer, cream-colored, thin, and stamped only with a number in the corner. You open it with care. Inside lies a narrow strip of paper, a residue of where the clip once rested. It bears a faint indentation, a tiny press mark, that suggests the clip held it tightly for some time. The strip carries no writing, no markings, no ink. It is a blank whisper of whatever message once lived there. You lift it to the light, letting it sway slightly. The paper is thinner than usual, almost fragile, as though it was meant to be destroyed after reading, if indeed it was ever meant to be read. The absence of words feels intentional, though you can't say why. A soft smile tugs at you unexpectedly. It feels like the Cold War itself has written a joke, a message so secret it never bothered to exist. The clerk catches your expression and tilts their head, curious. You offer no explanation. Some humor is best left drifting quietly within the moment. You set the paper aside and focus again on the clip. Its alloy composition troubles the narrative in a gentle but persistent way. If it truly belonged to American personnel, then the wallet's supposed history becomes even more implausible. A non-existent identity, a map marked in ultraviolet ink from the other side of the ocean, and now this, a simple clip that connects the entire contents to briefing rooms, meant only for those deeply trusted. And yet the wallet itself feels like a forgery of authenticity crafted with too much care to be accidental. You ask the clerk if the alloy test provided any specific identification. They shake their heads softly. Only its origin, not its purpose. The ambiguity feels right. The story, after all, has never been in a hurry to resolve itself. You feel a kind of calm in that truth, as though accepting the unknowable is part of the rhythm of these mornings. You place the clip back beside the wallet and step toward the window. The station outside moves gently, trains easing into their platforms with graceful inevitability. A porter sweeps the steps, his broom whispering across the stone. A woman writes something in her notebook, pausing between lines to think, her hand lingering in the air, just a moment longer than necessary. The small gesture reminds you of the writer of the grocery list, their hand-pressing purpose into mundane words. You return to the table, resting your palm lightly beside the wallet. The objects inside seem to watch with quiet patience, revealing only as much of themselves as you're ready to understand. You feel the presence of a question forming in the air, not a loud or urgent one, but a soft, persistent inquiry. Why was an American alloy used in a wallet that appears distinctly European? Was the owner caught between worlds, or merely pretending to belong to one side while moving through the other? The question stays with you as you leave the evidence office, walking back into the soft corridor where winter light pools along the floor. You don't need the answer yet. The story unfolds slowly, like a note passed under a door rather than handed directly to you. And somewhere beneath that calm unfolding lies a single lingering uncertainty. If the paperclip once held something important, what message did it bind, and who exactly was meant to read it? You enter the evidence office the next morning, expecting the familiar tableau, the wallet opened like a quiet invitation, the clerk hovering with polite hesitation, the room carrying that soft, listening stillness that has followed each new discovery. But today, the atmosphere feels different, lighter in some places, heavier in others, as though something in the room has shifted positions while no one was looking. The wallet sits alone at the center of the table, its leather surface catching the muted glow of the overhead lamp in a way that makes it look almost new. Too new, in fact. The clerk emerges from the back room carrying a small box lined with fabric. They set it down gently and glance toward you with an expression you've come to recognize: curiosity, threaded with an almost childlike anticipation, as though they've stumbled upon a magic trick and now want to see if you notice it too. We examined the wallet, they say, folding their arms loosely. Not the contents this time. The wallet itself. You move closer, drawn by the tone in their voice. The leather from a distance appears convincingly aged, faint discoloration, the suggestion of soft creases near the fold, slight dulling along the edges. But as you lift it, feeling its weight settle into your palm, you sense immediately that something is wrong. The leather bears no true wear, no impressions from years spent in pockets, no scent of skin oils, no softening from hands that might have held it in moments of distraction or worry. It feels like an object mimicking age rather than carrying it. It's artificially distressed, the clerk murmurs. The upper layer is treated to appear worn, but underneath it's pristine. They pause. Almost too pristine. You run your thumb along the edge, feeling the smoothness there, the kind that comes from factory finishing rather than time. You press gently on the areas where creases should have formed from natural use, and the material resists you with quiet stubbornness. The wallet has never truly been bent, never compressed against a leg while walking, never tossed onto a table at the end of a long day. It only pretends to have lived. You open it slowly. The interior is even more telling. The pockets maintain a perfect symmetry, no stretching where cards might have rested, no indentation from coins, no faint darkening from the oils of age. The lining has no fraying, no loose threading, no subtle sagging. Even the faint scent that rises from within carries the sterile neutrality of recent manufacture, rather than the warm, familiar mustiness of something handled across years. You close the wallet, then open it again, watching the fold hinge smoothly without hesitation. It feels rehearsed, like someone practicing movements meant to appear natural. A quiet thought slips into your mind that the wallet was never meant to belong to anyone, not in any real sense. It was constructed for performance, designed to give the impression of history without having lived a single moment of it. The clerk produces a small magnifying loupe and hands it to you. "Look at the stitching," they say softly. You bring the loupe to your eye and examine the seams. The threads are immaculate, consistent to the millimeter, unmarred by friction. No loose fibers, no fading, no wear from pockets lined with lint or sand or grainy dust from long commutes. Only the outer surface bears the illusion of age, and even that illusion feels slightly exaggerated, as if the creator had studied aging from photographs rather than real experience. You lower the loupe, letting the magnitude of the detail settle. It's a prop, you murmur without meaning to. The word floats into the room like a feather, soft, weightless, yet strangely precise. The clerk smiles faintly, as if pleased to hear you confirm what they themselves hesitated to say. A very expensive prop, they add. The kind made for diplomatic use, perhaps, or covert operations with brief lifespans. You think back to the paperclip with its rare alloy, the map written in American ultraviolet ink, the grocery list with handwriting that traveled too far, the photograph beneath the lining showing a meeting that never officially occurred. Each item felt like a fragment of lived history, yet each one was placed inside a wallet that had lived no history at all. A quiet paradox takes shape. Perhaps the contents were real, but the container was not. A vessel manufactured for a single purpose, never meant to endure, never meant to accompany anyone through the mundanity of daily life. A delivery system of sorts. One that could be discarded the moment its usefulness ended. Your fingers drift along the outer leather again, testing the false creases. They give slightly under pressure the illusion bending, but not breaking. You feel a strange tenderness toward the object, not for its authenticity, but for its earnest attempt to appear genuine. It's trying so hard to lie convincingly that you almost want to let it succeed. As you set the wallet down, you notice a tiny notch near the fold, barely visible unless held at the right angle. The clerk steps closer, intrigued. "We missed that," they whisper. You lift the wallet again, tilting it beneath the lamp until the notch reveals itself fully. It appears to be an incision, clean, precise, made by a blade sharper than anything used in casual repair. A seam meant to be opened. You slide your fingernail gently along the edge, feeling for any shift in the leather. It flexes slightly tighter than normal, as though concealing something within its hidden layers. The memory of finding the photograph beneath the lining comes back to you like a soft callback, a gentle reminder that the wallet's facade has been deceptive from the beginning. Perhaps this incision hides another secret, waiting to be patient no longer. But you don't force it. Not yet. The story seems to know when you're ready for the next piece, and you've learned to respect its pacing. Instead, you fold the wallet closed, letting it rest on the table with the quiet dignity of an object that still carries mysteries. You step toward the window, feeling the soft chill of the glass beneath your fingertips. Outside, the station hums with its usual rhythms, trains, arriving passengers, murmuring porters sweeping the platforms. The world continues without knowing it is brushing against a mystery crafted with extraordinary care. You return to the table one last time. The wallet lies there with its artificial wear, its perfect stitching, its untouched interior. A creation pretending to be used. A story pretending to be ordinary. You feel an unexpected fondness for it, as though it were a character rather than an object, one that has played its role with sincerity and now waits quietly for applause. You pick up the wallet once more and hold it lightly in your hands. A single question drifts into your thoughts, gentle and unhurried. If the wallet was crafted for a single purpose, then what was that purpose? And why choose you as the person to discover it? The question follows you out of the evidence office, settling beside you like a companion as you walk down the quiet corridor. And though no answer comes, the mystery deepens in a way that feels oddly soothing, as though you've slipped into a dream with no need to wake too soon. You step into the evidence office the next morning, with the familiar sense that the story has been walking ahead of you, leaving just enough footprints to follow at your own pace. The air feels cooler today, carrying the faint scent of paper and metal, an aroma you've begun to associate with quiet revelations. The clerk stands near the center table, arms folded loosely, expression somewhere between disbelief and reluctant acceptance. The wallet rests open as usual, but beside it lies a new sheet of paper, its corners weighted by two small metal clips. You notice immediately that the sheet contains fingerprint impressions, dark smudges arranged in the neat, methodical pattern used for internal analysis. The clerk doesn't speak at first. Instead, they nod toward the page with a slow exhale, as though easing the moment into existence. "You'll want to see this," they say softly. Their tone isn't dramatic, just quietly unsettled, the way one might sound after waking from a dream they can't fully interpret. You move closer, letting your gaze settle on the prints. The first set appears ordinary enough: clear ridges, distinct loops, the kind of patterns analysts can identify at a glance. You feel the familiar rhythm of recognition. This is how fingerprints are supposed to look. But then you notice the second set beneath it, taken only a few hours later, and your breath stills without warning. They don't match. Not exactly. Not fully. The ridge lines share similarities with the first imprint, enough to suggest the same general pattern. But the loops bend at slightly different angles, the whorls shift just a fraction of a millimeter, and one of the deltas appears to have migrated, if such a thing were even possible. Fingerprints do not change shape. That is one of the few certainties even the Cold War could not manipulate. And yet, here you are. The clerk points to a faint note typed along the margin. The first sample was taken when the wallet arrived, they explain. The second, yesterday afternoon. Same wallet, same surface, same contact point. Their voice softens to a puzzled whisper. But the patterns aren't fixed. You lean in, studying the prints more closely. The second set looks almost blurred, as though the ridges were pulled in different directions by the faintest tremor. Not a smudge, not contamination. Something else. Something like a shift. A gentle, impossible shift, like handwriting copied by someone trying too hard to appear natural. A soft, incredulous laugh escapes you. Not a loud laugh, just the sort of quiet exhale that comes when reality politely steps aside for something stranger. The clerk smiles faintly in response. though the expression carries more confusion than amusement. I checked the equipment twice, they murmur, as if offering reassurance neither of you quite believes. It's not a machine error. It's the prints. You lift the page, feeling its cool surface hum lightly against your fingertips. The prints look as though someone tried to mimic an earlier set, but lacked the precision to replicate them perfectly. You picture a hand reaching for the wallet, a real hand belonging to a real person, yet somehow its imprint glosses and reshapes, almost as though the identity behind it cannot settle into one form. Your thoughts drift to the identification card, belonging to no one. The photograph beneath the lining that carried two faces layered into one, the artificially aged wallet, pretending to have lived a life it never lived. Each object seems to echo the same quiet theme, ambiguity, crafted with care, as if someone designed their entire existence to remain just out of reach. You set the page down gently. Did you run it through any external files, you ask, keeping your voice soft? The clerk nods. We tried the usual databases. Nothing. But they retrieve another sheet from the drawer, sliding it toward you with a certain hesitance. A restricted classification stamp catches your eye, East Berlin's old internal index, now half abandoned, half mystified by time. The clerk's voice lowers. A technician tried the prints there, not because they expected a match, but because the patterns seemed unusual. They pause long enough for the radiator's quiet hum to fill the room, and then they say, "We got a hit." But only partial. You glance down. The page contains an imprint similar to the second sample, matching perhaps 60% of the ridge structure. The entry is dated early '61 and associated with an individual known only by a code name. No photograph, no biography. Just a brief remark typed in the tiny, efficient strokes of a clerk who likely never knew what they were archiving. Patterns inconsistent. Subject may use altered prints. Observation recommended. The phrase feels like a whisper from the past. Altered prints. You recall rumors unverified, brushed aside as speculative nonsense, that certain operatives experimented with ways to alter fingerprints, temporarily using chemical masks or layered materials. It was dismissed as impractical, unreliable, closer to fiction than reality. And yet here in your hands lies something that suggests otherwise. You exhale slowly, letting the calm of the room settle around you. They changed you. Murmur not to the clerk, not even to yourself, but to the moment. The fingerprint shapes changed. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but just enough to betray the idea that the person behind them was never meant to be anchored to a single identity. The clerk, still watching you, asks gently, "Do you think the prints belong to the same person?" You think for a long moment before responding. Yes, you say softly. And no. It's an answer without clarity, but clarity has never been the goal of this quiet investigation. The truth seems content to drift rather than land. You move toward the window, letting the light frame the thought. Outside, the world continues with peaceful indifference. A train exhales steam. A man in a wool coat checks his watch. A woman ties a scarf around her child's neck, her hands moving with tender efficiency. None of them know that inside a modest office, a set of fingerprints has questioned the very notion of identity. You return to the table, laying your hand beside the prints. The clerk steps back, giving you room. The paperclip with its rare alloy, the ultraviolet map, the traveling handwriting, the non-worn wallet, all of it forms a constellation, each detail a star quietly vibrating with its own light. And now these prints join them, shimmering faintly at the edges of possibility. You lift the page once more, watching how the second set blurs slightly under the lamp. For a moment, You imagine the person who left them, someone who lived between borders, between names, between layers of themselves. Someone who could not be traced because they were not meant to be held by any single truth. A question settles into the room soft as dust. If fingerprints can shift, then what does it mean to leave a trace at all? You allow that question to follow you out of the evidence office, drifting beside you like a companion as you step into the quiet corridor. The station's ambient hum wraps around your thoughts, and you walk forward knowing the next revelation will unfold when it's ready, when the story feels you've rested long enough between breaths. You arrive at the station with the kind of calm anticipation that feels almost like greeting an old friend. The morning air carries a soft chill, the kind that persuades your breath into slow, steady clouds. Inside the evidence office, the quiet greets you, first gentler than silence, more like a room waiting for you to settle into it. The clerk stands beside the center table, hands resting lightly on the wooden edge. They look up when you enter, and there is something in their expression that suggests today's discovery did not reveal itself easily. The wallet lies open, its contents arranged in their familiar patient order. But one object sits apart from the rest, a pristine business card. At first glance, the card looks elegant in its simplicity, white stock, black lettering, a minimalist design that tries very hard to say nothing at all. It has the kind of confidence that comes from pretending to be unremarkable. And that more than anything is what draws your attention. The clerk gestures toward it with a small breath. This was slipped behind the interior pocket, they say. A place almost too obvious to hide anything meaningful. Which is why I suppose we didn't check there until this morning. Their tone carries a hint of self-directed amusement, the first soft joke of the day. You smile slightly, appreciating the moment, before letting your gaze drop back to the card. The name printed at the top, R. Halden and Kopshaw, is unfamiliar. The font is modest, almost shy, as though reluctant to commit to a personality. Beneath it sits a street address neatly typed, the ink crisp, despite the card's age. You tilt the card under the lamp, watching the light sweep across its surface. No scuffs, no fingerprints, no creases from wallets or fingers or hurried exchanges. The card is spotless, immaculate, untouched. And that alone is suspicious. You bring it closer, letting your eyes trace the lettering. Something about the serif edges looks too modern for the date the card implies. Subtle but noticeable, like a detail out of time. You glance at the clerk, who has already anticipated your question. The company doesn't exist, they say. The address was demolished 10 years ago. The building came down quietly, no press, no notice, just a line in a city planning memo. Nothing has been there since. You nod slowly. A non-existent company tied to a location that no longer stands. It fits neatly within the wallet's growing pattern of impossible details. But as you examine the card more closely, an additional strangeness reveals itself. The edges are too sharp. The cardstock has the texture of something recently manufactured, not something carried and forgotten through years of bureaucratic exchanges. It feels like a fresh forgery disguised as an old artifact. You turn it over. The back is blank, perfectly blank. No faint pencil marks, no ink transfers, no accidental smudges. A surface waiting for something to be written, yet never used. If it ever belonged to a real company, the clerk murmurs, there's no record of it, not even in the outdated directories. Their voice carries the softness of a question that doesn't need to be answered yet. You study the card again, your thumb brushing against the texture. It's subtly thicker than average, and you press lightly to test its stiffness. A faint resistance meets your finger, the kind that suggests multiple layers rather than one. You tilt it again under the lamp. For a second, just a second, you catch the ghost of something beneath the surface. An impression. A shadow. A shape not meant to be seen unless you were looking exactly for it. You inhale softly. The clerk notices the shift in your posture. You see it too, they say. You nod, bringing the card closer to the light. The faint shape resolves itself, slowly, lines crossing at right angles, the subtle geometry of a schematic or a map. Only fragments nearly invisible beneath the top layer, but enough to hint at something once printed there, later wiped away or sealed beneath new paper. A quiet erasure, a buried message. A callback surfaces in your thoughts, the ultraviolet ink on the tourist map glowing only when asked the right way. This card carries its own secret too, but in a different style. Whereas the map whispered through invisible ink, the business card hides something more physical, more structural. A past life sealed beneath a facade. The clerk retrieves a small light box, sliding it across the table. You place the card atop it, and when the glow pulses through the paper, the hidden lines sharpen. Not fully, never fully, but enough to see the suggestion of a grid, perhaps a layout of rooms or streets, or something even more specific. One square carries a small mark, an X, or perhaps a dot overlaid upon a corner. It reminds you of the circles on the ultraviolet map marking embassy sectors that seem too purposeful to dismiss. Could be a blueprint, the clerk whispers, or a floor plan. You tilt your head. Or a meeting point, you offer softly. The clerk exhales slowly, absorbing the thought. You sit back, letting the moment stretch. The business card feels suddenly heavier, as though aware of its own contradictions. A forged company, a demolished address, a blank front, a hidden schematic beneath the surface. It doesn't pretend to be something ordinary, it pretends to be something pretending to be ordinary. A faint laugh escapes you, surprising the stillness of the room. This wallet, you say under your breath, is going to need its own autobiography. The clerk chuckles quietly, appreciating the softness of the humor without interrupting the mood. You study the address printed on the card. You've never been there, but the name rings faintly in memory. A street once rumored to host a drop site, an old tram stop 2 blocks away from a known dead drop location. Not a famous one, not the type whispered about widely, but one used briefly before fading into irrelevance after a botched operation. You recall hearing that the site was abandoned because it lost its anonymity, though no one ever explained how. Perhaps this card is connected to that place. Or perhaps it is connected to nothing at all, designed merely to appear connected to something important enough to attract interest. The open question circles you gently: who forged a business card for a non-existent company tied to a demolished address near a covert drop site, and then buried a schematic beneath it? You place the card down with care, feeling the faint pulse of the story beneath your fingertips. The wallet seems to watch you quietly, as if acknowledging that you've uncovered yet another one of its layers. Yet you sense there are more, always more. None rushed, none shouted, all patient. The clerk gathers the items slowly, their movements deliberate, almost meditative. You take one last look at the card, feeling a softness toward it, not because it's trustworthy, but because it tries so hard to hide its truth with elegance. You step toward the window, letting the morning light wash across your thoughts. Outside, the world feels impossibly normal. A man feeds pigeons. A porter carts luggage. A child tugs at their parent's coat, eager for something simple and sweet. And yet, just a few rooms away, a tiny card sits on a table whispering about places that no longer exist, names that never were, and diagrams hidden beneath the surface like memories sealed in an envelope. As you walk out of the office, the question drifts beside you with the same calm persistence that has followed every discovery so far. If the business card hides a forgotten blueprint, then what structure or meeting or secret was erased beneath its surface, and who needed to bury it so carefully inside a wallet that was never meant to be lost? You arrive at the evidence office with a sense of quiet familiarity, as though the room has become a place where the morning settles differently, drifting more slowly, listening more carefully. The clerk greets you with a gentle nod, but today there is something else in their posture, a subtle tilt of anticipation, the kind that suggests they've been waiting for the moment you would walk through the door. The wallet lies open on the table, but a single folded napkin rests beside it, the kind found in cafes and train station diners, printed with a cheerful logo meant to brighten quiet meals. Except this logo is wrong. Not wrong in a spectacular or dramatic way, just quietly, politely anachronistic. The clerk taps the napkin lightly, as though introducing you to an old friend with a surprising story. "We found this wedged behind the card sleeve," they say. "Look at the logo." You unfold the napkin carefully. It is soft, preserved well despite its age, the paper fibers still intact. The logo near the corner shows a stylized cup of coffee with a rising swirl of steam and the chain's familiar name, one well known in Bonn during that era. But the font is different. The steam line is thicker. The cup's handle curves in a way the chain hadn't adopted until years before it retired the design entirely. And most importantly, this version hadn't existed on the date stamped inside the wallet. A napkin with the wrong logo. A tiny detail easy to overlook yet impossibly out of place. You brush your thumb across the printed ink. It feels slightly raised, an artifact of older printing techniques, and yet the design belongs to a later era. A soft laugh escapes you unbidden, because the absurdity is so gentle, so quiet, that it feels like the Cold War leaving you a private joke. The clerk hears the laugh and smirks. "I knew you'd like this one," they murmur. You examine the napkin again this time, turning it slowly under the lamp. The fibers catch the light, revealing faint indentations, creases too intentional to be accidental. Someone folded this napkin, precisely tucking it into the wallet with delicate care. A clandestine meeting, perhaps, or simply a moment where someone needed to wipe ink from their fingers. You imagine the scene, a dimly lit diner, conversations drifting like smoke, someone ordering coffee they won't finish, their attention fixed instead on a coded message, or a passerby who doesn't realize they're being watched. But as you study the napkin further, something shifts in your perception. The pattern of the indentations suggests handwriting once pressed into the surface, letters shaped not by ink but by pressure. You angle it again, letting the shallow lines catch the lamplight. Slowly a word begins to form. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to suggest intention. You make out the faint curve of an R, perhaps, or the top half of a B. The clerk leans closer. "We thought it might be a name," they whisper. Or part of one. A name enclosed in a napkin that shouldn't exist. A signature pressed silently into an object pretending to belong to a moment it never lived. You fold the napkin back along its original creases, feeling the weight of its quiet contradiction. The diner logo seems almost cheerful, unaware that it doesn't belong here. It feels like a mask, a small disguise meant to blend into the everyday world. And yet the disguise trips over its own timeline. The clerk retrieves a city directory from the shelf, a thick volume with worn edges. They flip to the listing for the cafe chain, tracing a finger along the evolution of its branding. This version of the logo, they say, carefully didn't appear until 3 years after the wallet was supposedly lost. Their voice softens, which means someone put it there later, or the wallet's history isn't what it appears. You think of the artificially aged leather, the identity card that never belonged to a real person, the shifting fingerprints, the hidden blueprint beneath the business card, the ultraviolet marks on the tourist map. Every object in the wallet behaves like a puzzle piece from a different box, and yet each piece fits into the same quiet mood, the mood of something constructed, something staged, something curated with elegant misdirection. A faint memory surfaces the way the paperclip bore tiny thermal distortions, as though it once held something under tension. The grocery list with its traveling handwriting. The photograph with two faces layered into one. Each discovery has felt like a sigh from the past, carrying more intention than accident. You bring the napkin closer to your face. The scent is faint, but recognizable, a lingering trace of something like old wood and soap, the kind used in European diners of the time. And yet the scent feels too neutral, too understated, as though the napkin was stored carefully preserved for a purpose. You wonder if the person who folded it into the wallet chose it precisely because its innocence made it a perfect hiding place. You run your fingers gently along the indentation again. A name or part of one. The shape of a letter that might connect back to something else you've seen, or might belong to another object waiting to reveal itself. The uncertainty is soothing, almost meditative. The Cold War liked to hide meaning inside accidents, but this wallet hides intention inside casual objects. "Do you think the napkin was planted?" the clerk asks softly. You consider the question, slowly letting the room breathe with you before answering. "I think you murmur it was waiting." The clerk nods without argument. You step toward the window, letting the soft winter light spill across the napkin. Outside, a man stands in the cold, stirring sugar into a paper cup of coffee, unaware that he mirrors some long-forgotten figure who once sat in a diner pressing letters into a napkin. A small, strangely comforting loop across time. You return to the table and place the napkin gently beside the wallet. It lies there with a strange dignity, humble yet meaningful, ordinary yet impossible. And you find yourself thinking that if an object could hum, this napkin would hum quietly, like a note from a distant melody. You turn to leave, pausing with your hand on the doorframe. The question that rises does so without sharpness, without urgency, just a soft persistence you've come to expect from this unfolding narrative. If the napkin came from a future logo, then when exactly was the wallet assembled, and who placed inside it a message hidden not in ink, but in the subtle pressure of a hand that pressed just firmly enough to be remembered? The question walks beside you as you step into the corridor, gentle and patient, waiting for the next discovery to make its presence known. You enter the evidence office expecting another small contradiction, perhaps a misplaced stamp or a forgotten name. But today, the room feels heavier, as though the quiet itself has thickened. The clerk stands near the table, posture unusually still, eyes fixed on something so small you can barely see it even as you draw closer. The wallet lies open as always, but beside it rests a tiny metallic bead no larger than a grain of rice. It is so unimposing, so delicate that for a moment you mistake it for debris, a stray fragment from the spine of the wallet maybe, or a bit of hardware shed from an old clasp. But the clerk's expression tells you otherwise. "We almost missed it," they whisper. Their voice is not fearful, just reverent, the way one might speak inside a cathedral. It was embedded in the seam between the stitching. Hidden so deeply that you'd never notice unless you were looking for thread damage. They pause. There was no thread damage. You lean in, letting your breath settle before you place your fingertips on the table. The device gleams faintly under the lamp, just enough to betray its smooth contour. You have seen listening devices before, but never one so small, never one so quiet in its engineering. Even in the world of Cold War espionage, where technology often outran imagination, this feels unusual, and yet its presence inside the wallet feels almost expected. The wallet has been whispering intentions from the beginning. You pick up the device with a pair of tweezers, turning it delicately. It weighs almost nothing. A bead with no visible microphone, no wiring, no opening for sound. Just a small seam around the exterior, barely perceptible where two halves must have been fused together. "We tested it," the clerk says, leaning closer. "It's not transmitting anymore. But the internal coil..." They trail off, retrieving a small report from the table and sliding it toward you. It was active at some point, designed to record briefly, very briefly. You read the typed impressions. Short-range capture, limited battery, meant for proximity recording only. You pause. Proximity, you repeat softly, meaning whatever was recorded was not meant to travel far. Someone intended to gather a sliver of sound, perhaps a name, perhaps a code phrase, and then retrieve the device quickly. But they never did. You place the bead back on the table, watching how it sits perfectly still, as though pretending to be harmless. A soft breath escapes you, halfway between a sigh and a quiet laugh. The Cold War had a strange sense of elegance: hide a listening device inside a wallet made to look old, but never used plant items from different timelines, leave clues too strange to dismiss, yet too gentle to alarm. The wallet doesn't scream secrecy, it murmurs it. You glance at the seam where the device was embedded. No break in the threading, no irregularity in the stitching pattern. Whoever inserted it had hands steady enough to deceive even a skilled leatherworker. You imagine the craftsman or the operative working in silence, needle passing through layers of material with such precision that not even an expert would know the seam was anything but continuous. It gives you an unexpected sense of comfort that such artistry existed even in the service of ambiguous intentions. The clerk taps the report again. This was not meant for long-term surveillance, they say. It's a single-moment recorder. Whoever placed it expected the wallet to pass very close to the person they were monitoring. You turn the device over once more. A single-moment recorder. A collector of passing breaths and whispers. Something designed to capture what someone said while reaching into a pocket or handing the wallet from one person to another. It could have recorded a single sentence, a single word. Perhaps even silence, because silence in the Cold War could be meaningful too. You think of the earlier discoveries, the photograph with its double image, the ticket from a city the owner never visited, the business card, hiding a blueprint, the fingerprint patterns that refused to stay still. This device fits perfectly into that ecosystem of contradictions. A listening bead placed inside a wallet nobody was meant to use. A tool expecting its own retrieval but abandoned. "What do you think it recorded?" the clerk asks quietly. You let your eyes drift to the small bead. You imagine a hand reaching into the pocket, the faint rustle of fabric, the soft brushing of fingertips. Perhaps a whispered phrase spoken too close to the seam. Perhaps nothing at all. The unknowability is soothing. Something brief, you reply. Something they thought was important. Something they needed to be sure of. The clerk nods, thoughtful, but important to who you consider that question. The device is neither Soviet nor Western in any recognizable way. Too refined for rushed fieldwork, but too improvised for mass deployment. It feels personal, an object made for a specific purpose, crafted for a single event. The kind of thing an operative might build themselves, not because they lacked access to equipment, but because they needed something more subtle than standard issue. You lift the wallet again and run your fingers along the interior seams. Now that you know where the bead was hidden, the the seam feels different. Still seamless, still perfect, but weighted somehow by your knowledge. You think of the technician who found the device, the almost missed anomaly. The clerk had said there was no thread damage, which means the bead was inserted during assembly, not afterwards. This wallet, you murmur, was built around the device. The clerk's eyes widen just slightly, the realization settling into them. So everything else inside may have been added later you finish, or earlier. But the wallet itself, it began with a purpose. The thought becomes a soft anchor in your mind. The wallet was not constructed and then used. It was constructed for use, for a moment, for a sound, for a whisper. A subtle callback drifts gently into your thoughts, how the ultraviolet map felt curated, how the artificial distress on the leather looked studied rather than natural, how the fingerprints shifted slightly, as if resisting identification. Each item may have been added to shape a story. But this listening bead suggests the story began long before the items were placed. Maybe you continue softly, the wallet was the meeting point. Not the photograph, not the map, not the ticket. The wallet itself. The clerk breathes in, slowly absorbing the idea. Then why abandon it, you consider for a long moment. The answer comes not as certainty, but as gentle intuition. Perhaps you whisper they never meant to abandon it. Perhaps something went wrong. The radiator hums softly, filling the silence where your words settle. You place the wallet and the bead together on the table. The contrast between their sizes almost poetic. One small enough to miss entirely. The other built large enough to hide a world of contradictions. You step toward the window, letting the morning light gather along the glass. Outside, a boy runs to catch up with his mother's scarf fluttering like a small flag. A man lights a cigarette, watching its smoke drift in slow spirals. Life continues with the quiet indifference of a world unaware that a tiny bead on a table holds a mystery too small and too large at once. As you leave the office, the unanswered question walks beside you with calm persistence. If the wallet was constructed around a single listening moment, what words or silence was it built to capture? And who was meant to hear what it heard? You enter the evidence office the next morning with the quiet expectation that the wallet has yet another way of reshaping its own story. The room feels hushed, not with tension, but with a kind of patient anticipation, as though the walls themselves have learned to expect surprises. The clerk stands near the table holding a thin file with both hands, their posture unusually upright. The wallet rests beside them, closed for once, as if conserving energy before its next revelation. We checked the manufacturing origin, the clerk says softly, offering the file. Every tag, every stitch pattern, every component. Their voice hovers between curiosity and disbelief. The thing is, this wallet wasn't sold anywhere. You blink, then take the file, letting the edges press lightly into your palms as you open it. Inside are printed analyses, leather grain comparisons, manufacturing reports, serial number checks, European import logs, even a few classified ledgers that must have required quiet favors to access. Each column ends the same way: no match found. Not manufactured, not imported, not distributed, not cataloged, not even recorded as a prototype from any known brand. You lift the wallet, feeling its familiar weight settle against your fingers. For days you've grown accustomed to its contradictions. Artificial wear, unused interior, hidden seams, impossible artifacts inside. But this absence of origin feels different. It feels definitive. How is that possible, you ask quietly, though the answer seems to form even as you speak. The clerk leans forward slightly. We consulted a technician who specializes in diplomatic equipment, they say. She examined the stitching patterns, the interior lining, the dye compounds. A pause. Then softly she said, "It looks like one of the test batches." You glance up. Test batches for diplomatic issue, the clerk explains. Not commercial release. Experimental production runs used to gauge durability or concealment potential. Most never go into circulation. They're stored, destroyed, or repurposed for classified use. You feel a slow ripple of understanding. So the wallet wasn't just artificially aged, it was never meant to have an identity at all. It was built to contain secrets, not coins. To serve a moment, not a person. A vessel engineered for invisibility. You run your thumb along the spine, letting the leather warm beneath your touch. How many of these batches existed, you ask? 3 that we know of, the clerk replies, lowering their voice instinctively. All produced for American diplomatic trials in Europe. None of them were ever distributed. The records say they were locked away. Yet, here it is, you murmur, sitting in a train station evidence room. A soft laugh escapes you, not humorous, but appreciative, like acknowledging a well-executed sleight of hand. The wallet behaves as though it wandered away from its own classified history, slipping into a place where it shouldn't exist, and then almost politely allowing itself to be found. You open it again. Now that you know it wasn't sold anywhere, the interior looks different. Too pristine, too precise. The curves of the pockets seem almost sculpted. The lining rests against the frame with mathematical exactness. You imagine an engineer designing it for maximum concealment, for quiet durability, for the kind of use that never shows on the surface. You examine the serial number stamped along the inside fold. It looks ordinary, just a sequence of 7 digits, but you now understand how deceptive that simplicity is. The clerk retrieves a small sheet from the file. We trace the number, they say. It doesn't correspond to any production run. So it's fake, you ask. Not fake, the clerk says. Non-standard. A placeholder. The kind used when an item is not meant to appear in any inventory. You sit with that thought for a moment. A placeholder serial number. A wallet designed to carry items that don't want to be traced. A piece of equipment created for diplomatic use and then erased from the world's paperwork. The realization settles gently without shock, the way quiet truths often do. You think back to the listening device found in the seam, the ultraviolet ink on the map, the rare alloy in the paperclip, the shifting fingerprints, the photograph showing a meeting that never occurred. Each part of the puzzle hints at someone navigating boundaries between countries, between identities, between truths. You close the wallet again and notice something new, a faint rigidity beneath the leather too structured for a normal product. You press lightly along the interior frame. Something flexes beneath your fingertips. Not a hidden object this time, but a reinforcement, an internal structure. The clerk nods when they see your expression. Reinforced frame, they say. Composite fibers. Early prototypes used for diplomatic field gear. Improves concealment. Strengthens the seams. Meaning it was designed to carry weight without deforming, you say. Or to hide things, the clerk adds softly. The weight of that simple statement lingers. A wallet designed to hide things. Not money, not receipts, but information. Devices, messages, all the quiet artifacts you've uncovered so far. You glide your fingers along the side seam again, tracing the same place where the listening bead was found. The reinforcement beneath the leather feels almost like armor. Protective. Intentional. You imagine the wallet before it ever reached the station, resting in a drawer inside a diplomatic office, waiting for assignment. Maybe selected for a specific operation. Maybe carried by an agent whose fingerprints shifted, because their identity needed to shift. The idea drifts softly through your thoughts, not demanding belief, just offering itself. And the test batches, you ask. How many were kept? The clerk hesitates. One, they answer. Just one batch was deemed suitable for field modifications. They made 10 units. 10, you repeat, feeling the number settle. And this is one of them. The clerk nods. You close the file gently, as though not wanting to disturb the dust of old, forgotten decisions. Then you return the wallet to the table, letting it rest once more, as it always does, quiet, composed, patient. Outside the office window, a train whistles softly before pulling into the station. A few snowflakes drift past the glass, melting before they reach the sill. The world continues its slow choreography, unaware that a piece of vanished equipment from a diplomatic prototype batch has slipped into its orbit. You pause, feeling the absence of something you hadn't realized you were expecting. There's no record, you say quietly. No distribution logs, no assignments, no retrieval reports. None, the clerk agrees, as if the batch never left storage. But it did, you whisper. At least one unit did. And whoever carried it left behind a story so scattered, so carefully fractured, that every clue inside contradicts the last. Yet each contradiction supports the others like a quiet symphony. You place your palm lightly on the wallet, sensing not its secrets, but its silence. A single open question rises beside you, like a companion you've walked with for days. If this wallet was one of only 10 prototypes never meant to reach public hands, then whose hands shaped its journey, and why did they choose to let it slip into a place where you would find it? The question follows you into the corridor, where the winter light waits as gently as ever, ready for the next revelation. You arrive at the station earlier than usual, long before the morning crowd has found its rhythm. The corridors feel hollow in a gentle way, carrying only the soft echo of your steps and the faint hum of the building settling into the day. When you enter the evidence office, the clerk is already seated, leaning over the table with an intensity softened only by the slow curl of steam rising from their untouched cup of tea. The wallet rests open beside them, but today it's not the leather that commands attention. It's the 4 coins laid out in a careful row, each one glinting beneath the overhead lamp like small, patient witnesses. The clerk looks up when you approach. These were inside, they say, sliding the coins toward you. We thought they were ordinary at first. Spare change. But their voice trails off, inviting you to see what they saw. The coins appear mundane, standard European, minting the kind you might find rattling at the bottom of any traveler's pocket. The metal is worn in places, but intact. You pick up the first one, feeling its familiar weight. Nothing unusual at first touch, but when you tilt it under the light, a tiny shimmer catches your eye. No more than a faint scratch near the raised edges of the engraving. You rotate the coin slowly. The scratch is too straight to be accidental, too clean to be a mark from casual handling. And it sits at a peculiar angle, intersecting with the outer ring of the design in a way that almost resembles intention. You pick up the second coin. Another scratch, this one curved slightly, like the beginning of a letter or the tail end of a symbol. The third and fourth coins carry marks as well, each distinct, yet somehow harmonizing into a pattern you can't yet name. The clerk lifts a small magnifier. We examined them closely, they say softly. The scratches were made with a very fine tool, not a knife. More like something designed for engraving. They pause, lowering their voice. Or coding. You feel the idea settle around you with the gentle gravity of recognition. Coins as carriers of information. Scratches as subtle as dust, waiting only for someone who knows to look for them. You lift all 4 coins at once, arranging them side by side. For a moment the marks seem random. But then you shift one coin slightly, letting it scratch a line with another. And suddenly the shapes begin to form something more coherent. A line meets another. A curve kisses the edge of a straight stroke. An angle completes itself across two separate surfaces. The coins together create a single message divided across four pieces, perhaps, so that no one coin reveals anything on its own. You inhale quietly as the idea unfolds. Try rotating them, the clerk murmurs. You turn each coin 90 degrees. The pattern becomes clearer. The lines converge into a shape that resembles not a letter, not a symbol you recognize, but a geometric form, something precise, almost mathematical. A key, maybe, or a coordinate. A soft laugh escapes you, its sound barely audible. Of course, you whisper. Of course they'd hide a code in the scratches of coins. The clerk meets your gaze with a small smile that acknowledges the humor in the absurdity. The Cold War loved its complicated simplicity, messages hidden inside objects so everyday that they would pass through the world unnoticed unless they fell into the right hands. And here inside a wallet not meant to be sold anywhere, inside seams not meant to be opened, rests a set of coins that quietly carry a secret across their surfaces. You place the coins onto a sheet of paper and begin arranging them carefully. When the four scratches align perfectly, the shape they create becomes unmistakable, a grid fragment. The slightest hint of a cipher key. Not the full pattern, just enough to evoke the memory of something used in scrambled memos and coded messages during the late 50s. You recall the rumor of a key used briefly in certain agencies, an experimental cipher system designed to look like nothing at all when broken into fragments. A key that appeared in one classified memo in '59 before fading entirely from use. Not discontinued exactly. Just abandoned the way an idea might be set aside, because it worked too well or too strangely, or not in the way anyone had planned. Could this be the same key? The clerk whispers, reading the recognition on your face. It looks like part of it, you say softly. Not the whole thing, but enough to imply connection. You take the magnifier, studying the scratches more deeply. Each line is shallow, but not hurried. The hand that made them moved with intention, as though carving a message onto the smallest canvas possible. You imagine someone sitting at a desk late at night, coins laid out before them, engraving a code into metal with the kind of concentration that turns seconds into hours. A person who trusted these quiet circles of copper to carry something the world wasn't meant to see. You lift one of the coins and turn it over. No additional marks, no hidden compartments, just the faint warmth of metal reflecting your touch. The simplicity soothes you. Even in its strangeness, the moment feels gentle. Why coins? The clerk asks softly, half to themselves. You consider the question. Coins travel easily. They're borrowed and traded, forgotten in pockets, passed between people without note. And yet they endure. You could lose a page, burn a note, misplace a card, but a coin stays with you. Patient. Unassuming. A perfect messenger. You lay them flat again, letting the pattern hold. The lines resemble a coordinate grid, but incomplete. Not latitude and longitude. Something more abstract. Something meant to overlay onto another diagram, perhaps the hidden blueprint beneath the business card. Perhaps the ultraviolet circles on the tourist map. You feel the stories of the objects beginning to braid together, subtly, not merging, but touching in small, soft intersections. A quiet callback drifts through your mind, the business card's hidden schematic. The map's glowing embassy marks the wallet's reinforced frame. Perhaps the code in the coins isn't meant to stand alone. Perhaps it completes something you haven't yet seen. Or perhaps it waits for the next object to reveal itself the way every piece in the wallet has waited patiently for its moment. You sit back in your chair, letting your breath settle. The clerk watches you with curiosity, sensing the rhythm of your thoughts. "What do you think it means?" they ask. "I think," you say slowly, "it verifies something. Not the message itself, but the ownership. Whoever carried this wallet knew this code, or was supposed to know it. It's like a signature." The clerk nods, absorbing the idea. You gather the coins one by one, feeling the faint indentations of their scratches beneath your fingertips. There's something intimate about them, small, smooth, marked, just enough to whisper a truth, rather than declare it. You imagine the last person who held them, their pocket warm, their steps steady, their identity shifting just enough to evade definition. And inside that pocket, these coins waited not for anyone but for the right moment, for the right observer, for you. You place them gently beside the wallet where they rest with quiet dignity. Another detail, another contradiction, another part of a story that deepens without ever demanding urgency. You turn toward the window, watching a solitary figure on the platform lean down to tie their shoe. The motion feels simple, unremarkable, and yet strangely grounding. The world outside moves with such gentle indifference, unaware that inside this quiet office, coins whisper about messages once carried across borders carved in frost. As you leave the office, the thought lingers beside you, comforting in its uncertainty. If these scratches form a key, last seen in a forgotten cipher, then what message were they meant to unlock? And why entrust it to something as humble, as enduring as a handful of coins? The question follows you down the corridor, soft and steady, waiting for whatever comes next. You find the evidence office quieter than usual, as though even the walls are waiting for something deliberate to unfold. The clerk sits at the table with their hands folded neatly, their gaze fixed on an object resting atop a square of soft cloth. At first you think it must be another fragment from the wallet, a coin perhaps, or some overlooked scrap of paper finally surfacing. But when you step closer, the glint of metal reveals something far more intimate. A wristwatch. It lies there with its face turned upward, the glass impossibly clear, the metal casing unblemished despite its age. The leather strap looks worn in the way real wear forms, creases along the buckle holes, a slight curvature where it once embraced a wrist. And yet the watch has not appeared in any earlier inspection. You know this instantly. You would have remembered. A watch carries personality in a way few objects do. "We found it beside the wallet," the clerk says softly, reading the confusion in your eyes before you can speak. Behind the lining, wedged between layers. You pick it up gently. It feels warm, though you know it shouldn't. The tick meets your fingers like a heartbeat, soft, steady, confident. You bring it closer to your ear. Tick, tick, tick. The rhythm is reassuring, but subtly off. Not irregular, not unhealthy. Simply aligned to something that feels out of step with the morning world. "What time does it show?" you ask quietly, though you can already see it. The hands point to an hour that makes no sense in this gentle dawn. "It's 3 hours ahead," the clerk whispers. You stare at the face. The watch ticks smoothly, unhurried, but its time belongs to a place far from here. Not an error, not a battery quirk. Mechanical watches do not jump ahead on their own. Someone wound it deliberately. Someone set it to match a rhythm that did not belong to this station. You turn the casing over. The back bears no inscription, no initials, not even a manufacturer's mark beyond a tiny stamped number at the edge, too small for ordinary branding, too precise for ornament. You retrieve the magnifier from the table and tilt the casing under the lamp. The number resolves into focus, not a date, not a batch code. A frequency. A soft chill drifts through the room. The clerk steps closer, lowering their voice. It corresponds to a military signal band, they murmur. One that was decommissioned 2 years ago. They hesitate, then add, and used only by a handful of agencies before that. You let the watch settle into your palm, feeling its steady pulse against your skin. A watch set to a time zone no one here uses, linked to a frequency no longer in operation. It feels like a message disguised as a memory. You imagine the owner of the wallet wearing this watch, checking it under dim station lights, listening to the tick-sync with a signal only they could interpret. Perhaps the time was not wrong at all. Perhaps the world around the watch was the one running late. A faint callback drifts gently into your thoughts. The ultraviolet ink from the tourist map aligning with embassy sectors. The faint schematic hidden beneath the business card. The cipher scratched into the coins. All coordinates of a sort, fractured, partial, incomplete. Now this watch marking not just hours, but alignment with something broadcast quietly, briefly, by someone who understood how to listen. You rotate the watch again, running your thumb along the leather strap. It is undeniably worn, creased by real use, shaped by a real wrist. More real than the wallet itself, you realize. The wallet was manufactured. The watch was lived in. And this contradiction hums through you like distant static. "Wend it," the clerk says softly. You hesitate, then turn the small crown. The gears respond with elegant ease, clicking faintly beneath your fingertips. The hands move with a smoothness that betrays careful maintenance. Whoever owned this watch tended to it meticulously. Not out of vanity, but duty. As you wind, something strange emerges, a slight resistance near the end of the turn. Not mechanical strain. Something tactile. You stop and tilt the watch once more. Under the lamplight between the crown and the casing, a sliver of metal catches your attention. You lift the magnifier again and lean in. A marking. Faint. Almost invisible. Letters, not numbers. Engraved so small they feel like a whisper. VX12. You breathe quietly. The clerk leans closer. "Is that a serial?" "No," you murmur. A designation. A designation for what you don't say. But you know. A prototype model. Equipment issued only to operatives involved in signal intelligence during a brief window of experimentation. Devices tested with new frequencies, new timing mechanisms, new methods of tracking coded transmissions. Watches like this weren't sold. They weren't recorded in public logs. They were used by individuals who lived between clocks, between borders, between identities, between the hours the world acknowledged and the ones it didn't. You lower the watch to the table and let the silence breathe around it. The clerk watches you, waiting for the shape of your interpretation. "This isn't a personal item," you say softly. "It's a tool." The clerk nods. But a tool for what you think for a long moment. The watch ticks in the quiet room, its rhythm steady, almost meditative. And then the idea forms, not sharp, but gentle, like a shadow settling into place. For synchronization, you whisper. For timing, a meeting, a retrieval, a message. The clerk's eyes widen slightly. You imagine the operative stepping into a station like this one, listening to the delicate tick aligned with a distant signal. Waiting for a moment, a window measured not in minutes, but in frequencies. Waiting for someone to pass, or for something to happen. Perhaps they were meant to exchange the wallet. Perhaps they were meant to receive something inside it. Perhaps the moment came. Perhaps it didn't. And if it didn't, if something shifted, if something changed, then the watch's purpose would collapse quietly, leaving behind only the echo of an hour that never aligned with the world around it. You bring the watch close once more, listening to its pulse. The sound calms you, steady, measured, dreamlike. It pulls you into a rhythm not quite your own, as though inviting you into the operative's perspective. A gentle uncertainty settles into your thoughts, the kind that soothes rather than disturbs. If the watch was set to the wrong hour, perhaps the hour here was the wrong one, or perhaps both were right in their own quiet way. You place the watch beside the wallet, the two objects looking strangely harmonious, a vessel of secrets and a timekeeper of moments never caught. You step toward the window. Outside, a train pulls into the platform with perfect punctuality. People step onto the cold stone walkway, checking their own watches, aligning themselves with the time they trust. Inside, the watch on the table continues to tick in steady defiance of the morning. As you leave, the unanswered question follows you with familiar calm. If the watch aligned itself to a forgotten frequency, then what moment was it waiting for, and why did that moment never come? You arrive the next morning with the quiet awareness that the story has begun to circle back on itself, not in repetition, but in deepening, like a melody returning in a lower register. The evidence office carries a softness you've grown familiar with, a calm that feels almost companionable. The clerk stands beside the table, their hands resting lightly on the edges of a tray lined with archival cloth. When they look up at you, their expression carries a flicker of disbelief touched gently by awe. "We developed the photograph again," they say softly, as though raising their voice might alter what they found. You inhale slowly. The photograph, the one hidden beneath the lining of the wallet, the one showing the frost-covered archway, and the impossible meeting had already revealed more than it should. You step closer, drawn into the hush of the moment. On the tray lie two prints placed side by side. At first, they look identical, the same archway, the same winter glaze on the stone, the same two figures standing beneath the shadows. But as you lean in, you see it. The second print is different. Not wildly, not obviously. The shift is subtle, the way a dream might change when remembered twice. The figure on the left, the one who once turned slightly away, now faces the camera a little more directly. The angle of the shoulders has changed almost imperceptibly. The shadow has shifted. Even the frost near their boots seems to have rearranged itself, as though time slid a fraction of a second forward or backward during development. You blink your breath, forming a quiet cloud of surprise. How you murmur. The clerk shakes their head gently. "We used the same negative," they whisper. "Same chemicals, same timing, same conditions. But the image reformed." They tap the second print. It developed again. You lift the older print first, feeling the faint dryness of the paper beneath your fingertips. The original scene stares back at you, deceptively still. You then lift the new print, holding it close to the lamp. The differences linger like déjà vu, small enough to question, clear enough to trust. One of the faces, blurred originally, now carries more definition. Not enough to identify, but enough to unsettle the idea that photography is a fixed memory. You have the uncanny sensation that the photograph has a will of its own. Or perhaps it contains two moments from the same event layered impossibly into a single negative. The clerk brings forward a third sheet, this one covered in analytical notes. "We ran a spectral pass," they say, sliding it toward you. There are traces of a double exposure, but not the usual kind. It's as though the emulsion caught two impressions of the same scene at different instants. They hesitate. Or at different realities. You smile softly at their choice of word. The Cold War often flirted with realities not in the dramatic sense, but in the way documents could be rewritten, identities shifted, and photographs retouched until truth became something flexible. And now, here in your hands, lies an image that seems to echo that quiet philosophy. You bring the two prints together, aligning their edges. The differences whisper to you, subtle, patient, faint as breath on glass. The second face, once blurred, now appears slightly more distinct in the newer print, as though stepping forward from behind a veil. You can't make out features clearly, but the impression feels sharper. A jawline more defined, a posture more assertive. A soft callback drifts through your mind, the fingerprints that refuse to hold still shifting slightly between tests. An identity trying to exist, then slipping away. Now the photograph seems to mirror that behavior, showing a figure trying to settle into view, but never fully committing. The clerk clears their throat gently. We checked the camera model the original film was compatible with, they say. It hasn't been used in decades. But for the emulsion to capture two impressions like this, the photographer would have needed the subject to remain perfectly still. They pause. Or the photographer would have needed two subjects. You let that settle. Two subjects. Two impressions. A double image layered upon itself. The photograph you found beneath the wallet's lining had always felt like a secret pressed too tightly to reveal comfortably. Now it feels like a confession. You examine the archway behind the figures. In the newer print, the shadow cast by the left column stretches differently elongated, as though the light source shifted. The frost at the figure's feet forms different shapes, as if disturbed by a step taken between exposures. Even the air looks different, crisper in one print, softer in the other. The moment was not fixed. It lived twice. You lower the photograph and breathe deeply. Why hide this beneath the lining, you ask? The clerk considers it for a moment. Because it contains something unstable, they reply softly. Something someone didn't want seen or wanted seen only by the right person. You think again of the reinforced frame of the wallet, the hidden listening bead, the cipher in the coin scratches the blueprint beneath the business card. Each object hints at deliberate construction, not only of a physical container, but of a narrative. A message scattered across artifacts that reveal themselves only when approached, slowly, gently, almost reverently. You hold the photographs at arm's length. The subtle differences feel like breathing, as if the scene itself is alive, shifting quietly between the states of being seen and being remembered. Look at the corner, the clerk whispers. You tilt the newer print. A faint marking appears along the lower right edge, something not present in the original. A tiny dot. Then another. And another. 4 in total. You arrange them in your mind against the cipher scratched into the coins. The pattern is familiar. A key. Another piece of it. A fragment of code left behind inside the photograph, visible only after the second development. It feels like someone left breadcrumbs, not across a map, but across time. You run your thumb lightly along the edge of the print. A strange calm fills you, not because you understand, but because the photograph no longer feels like a broken truth. It feels like a whispered invitation, a gesture, a memory speaking twice. What do you think happened there? The clerk asks quietly. You don't answer immediately. You imagine two figures meeting beneath the archway, a place you've only ever known through reports and rumors. You imagine the cold air, the frost, the breath of two people whose identities blurred, even in the moment they stood still. Perhaps the photograph captured not a single meeting, but an overlap, a negotiation between identities, a conversation held in two versions of reality, recorded in one fragile moment of film. Something unresolved, you finally murmur. Something caught between what happened and what was meant to happen. The clerk nods slowly. You place both prints gently on the tray. They lie together like siblings born seconds apart, sharing everything, yet carrying small differences that feel quietly profound. You step toward the window. Outside, a thin veil of snow has begun to fall, drifting softly across the station platform. A porter sweeps the flakes from the steps, even as more descend his movements, patient, resigned, almost meditative. The world changes slowly outside, one flake at a time. Inside, the photograph changes quietly too, one impression, one development, one whisper at a time. As you leave the office, the question that follows you is not sharp, not urgent. It floats beside you like snowfall. If a photograph can develop twice, then what truth was it trying to reveal, and which version of that truth was meant for you? You arrive at the evidence office expecting another riddle quietly folded into the morning. But today the air feels different, charged, almost fragile. The clerk sits at the table, their posture unusually still, as though they are holding something delicate inside their breath. The wallet rests in its usual place, but it's not the wallet that draws your attention. It's the telephone on the far wall, the old black rotary set the office rarely uses, the one that normally blends into the background like a piece of outdated furniture. Today it feels almost alive. It rang, the clerk says before you even ask. Their voice is soft as though describing a ghost. Just once. Not a full ring. A single pulse. Almost like someone checked the line. They hesitate. The call trace came back. You wait. Warsaw, they whisper. Except, not exactly. The words drift into the quiet, gentle but unnerving. You take a slow step toward the desk, sensing the story deepening in a way that feels both natural and impossible. The clerk reaches for a small slip of paper, barely more than a torn corner, and hands it to you. On it, a single number is written. You recognize the prefix, or rather, the echo of one. This number hasn't been active in over a decade, the clerk murmurs. And the line it belonged to doesn't exist anymore. You study the digits. They feel both familiar and distant, like a name you once overheard, but never learned. Where exactly did the trace end, you ask? The clerk exhales. A disconnected payphone. In Warsaw, one that was removed years ago. Your fingers soften around the paper. A number that shouldn't exist. A phone that isn't there. A call that barely rang. You imagine the faint buzz that must have filled the room, the solitary tremor of sound. A whisper disguised as a ring. You move to the rotary phone and study its surface. The receiver rests perfectly in place, but you can almost sense the vibration still lingering in the cradle like the fading warmth of someone's hand. You touch it gently, feeling nothing but cool plastic. Yet the idea holds. You return to the table, the torn slip of paper cradled between your fingers. There is something intentional about it, too precise to be a glitch, too quiet to be a warning. A callback drifts softly through your thoughts, the listening bead hidden in the wallet's seam, built not to transmit, but to capture a single moment. The call feels like the inverse of that something not captured, not explained, just acknowledged. What were you doing when it rang, you ask? The clerk smiles faintly, almost sheepishly, looking at the photographs again. Both versions. They pause. It rang just as I placed them side by side. You let the detail settle. Two photographs showing two moments of the same scene. A call from two timelines away, a ring that belonged to a phone that no longer stands in Warsaw. The connections are not literal. They're atmospheric threads woven into fog. You sit, letting your thoughts drift calmly. Did the trace give a timestamp, you ask? The clerk nods. Yes, but it was odd. They slide another paper toward you. It logged a timestamp in 2 zones. You blink slowly. The sheet shows 2 times side by side, one matching the station's local clock, the other echoing the strange hour kept by the operative's watch, the one aligned with the old military frequency. It came through in both frequencies, the clerk whispers. You lean back, letting the soft absurdity wash over you. Of course it did. The story has been unfolding in dual impressions from the beginning, fingerprints shifting subtly, a photograph, developing twice a watch, ticking to the rhythm of a forgotten signal. A call arriving in 2 times at once fits beautifully into the gentle strangeness you've grown accustomed to. A quiet hum rises in your mind, the hush that comes before understanding, not a sharp revelation, but a slow recognition. Perhaps the wallet wasn't meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to signal when someone found it. Or perhaps it was waiting to confirm whether the person examining its contents understood the message it carried. You lift the slip of paper again, holding it between your thumb and forefinger. This number, you say softly, it was used for verification, wasn't it? The clerk frowns slightly. Verification of what? You smile gently. Of identity. Not your identity. Not the clerk's. But perhaps the identity of whoever was supposed to retrieve the wallet. Or whoever the wallet was designed to lure. The call might have been a quiet test, a single pulse, a moment of listening, checking if the line was active in more ways than one. You turn the paper over. A tiny indentation marks the back, barely visible but noticeable when you run your fingertip across it, as though the number had been pressed into the paper rather than written. You show it to the clerk, who nods slowly. A pressure mark, they say, from a writing tool that wasn't used on this sheet. You feel a soft warmth spread through your chest, a recognition of intention, where randomness had seemed possible. Someone didn't write this number. They pressed it, or copied it, or transferred it, the way faint writing sometimes imprints onto the next sheet of a notepad. Do you think the call was meant for us? The clerk asks softly. You let the question breathe. The truth feels too large for a simple answer, but the mood of the room suggests something gentler, something dreamlike. I think, you say slowly, it was meant to be heard. That's all. You place the slip beside the wallet, letting it rest there as though it already belongs. The story sits with you both for a while. The 2 prints, the shifting fingerprints, the impossible timestamp, the ringing phone that sounded like an exhale rather than a call. So many signals, so many messages not fully delivered. You stand and walk toward the window. The clouds outside drift in slow layers, the light diffusing into a soft haze. A bird perches on a signpost, tilting its head, as if listening for something only it can hear. The world feels attuned to the quiet in a way that soothes you. You turn back to the table. If the call came from a number that doesn't exist, you say, then it wasn't trying to reach a person. The clerk tilts their head. Then what was it trying to reach? A condition, you whisper. A moment. A state of the investigation. The clerk absorbs this gently, like someone accepting a truth they already sensed. You collect your coat, preparing to leave. But one last thought settles on you as lightly as snowfall, an open question that feels no rush to be answered. If a call can arrive from a number long disconnected, who or what was listening on the other end when the wallet finally revealed its secrets? The question accompanies you down the corridor, soft and steady, another quiet piece of the mystery waiting for the next dawn. You walk into the evidence office the next morning with the feeling that the air itself has begun to understand the rhythm of the investigation. Everything breathes more softly now. The radiator, the lamps, even the dust that drifts through the filtered light. The clerk looks up as you enter, but their usual calm greeting doesn't come. Instead, they hold a thin folder close to their chest, as though shielding its contents from the room. "We may have reached a turning point," they say quietly. The folder is placed on the table with unusual care. You notice immediately that it contains not one discovery, but many cross-references, typed notes, grainy photographs of objects you've spent days turning over in your hands. Yet the expression on the clerk's face suggests that what matters today isn't a new clue, but the shape of the clues when placed together. You take a breath, letting the room settle around you. "Show me," you murmur. The clerk opens the folder. Inside, the first page reads like an accusation whispered into the dark. The wallet may not have been lost. It may have been placed. You absorb the words, slowly feeling the weight of them settle across your shoulders rather than your mind. A placed wallet, an engineered discovery, an investigation constructed not by accident, but by design. The clerk moves closer, pointing to the list of objects, each one annotated with quiet precision. Every detail leads nowhere, they say, or everywhere. The photograph that changes, the shifting fingerprints, the non-existent business, the coins carrying part of a forgotten cipher, the watch keeping time for a frequency no one uses, the listening device, the prototype wallet. They pause before continuing, almost apologetically. It's too much coincidence. Too curated. You nod slowly. A soft calm moves through you, almost like relief. Part of you had sensed this from the beginning, that each discovery felt like a bead on a string pulled forward by a hand you could not see. Now the string begins to take shape. You lift the page, scanning the margins where the clerk has appended brief, hesitant thoughts. One line catches your eye. If the wallet was fabricated, then so was the story it pretended to carry. Fabricated. Not in the sense of forgery, but construction, assembly, an artifact engineered to behave like an enigma. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the soft hum of the lamp. The theory fits with a gentle inevitability. You remember the artificially aged leather, the invisible ink, the scratch-coated coins, the blueprint buried beneath the business card, the listening bead sewn into the seam during manufacturing, the watch aligned to a forgotten military signal, the photograph that refused to stay the same. Not clues gathered through life, but clues arranged like exhibits in a quiet museum of misdirection. You lower the page. "So someone created this," you say softly. "Every piece, every contradiction." The clerk nods, but why, the question hangs in the room with unusual stillness. It is not an impatient question, not a desperate one. It is gentle, like all the mysteries that have unfolded so far, yet deep enough to draw breath from the air. You sit slowly, resting your hands on the edge of the table. You feel the wallet's presence beside you, quiet and composed, as though waiting for you to look at it in a new light. For a moment, you imagine the person who assembled it. Not hurried, not careless. Someone who worked with reverence, placing each object into the wallet, the way a composer places notes into a score. What if you whisper, this was never meant to reveal a single identity, but to provoke the search for one? The clerk's brows lift, their expression softening into something between recognition and disbelief. "You mean, it's bait or a test," you murmur, "or a signal, or a message that only becomes clear when someone takes the time to examine each piece." You lean back, letting the idea breathe. Perhaps whoever constructed the wallet never intended to hide the truth. Perhaps they intended to hide the intention. Perhaps the wallet was designed not to obscure a secret, but to invite someone to determine whether a secret existed at all. A subtle callback drifts into your thoughts, the call from the non-existent phone. A verification, a check, a quiet acknowledgement that someone was at last following the intended path. Maybe the call wasn't meant to reach a person. Maybe it was meant to complete a circuit. The clerk opens another page. We looked into the timing, they say, when the wallet was found, when each item would have been placed, when the prototype batch disappeared from inventory. You glance at the dates. They do not overlap neatly. They weave, they loop, they converge only in suggestion, never in certainty, like shadows cast from different angles onto the same wall. Whoever assembled this, the clerk continues, had access to objects spanning years, maybe decades. It's like a curated archive of inconsistencies. An archive. Yes, the word feels right. An archive of false moments, false identities, false coordinates, each one whispering toward the truth, not by revealing itself but by contradicting the others. You imagine the operative, if that is indeed what they were, standing in a workshop or a quiet room, laying out these objects with care, testing the ink under ultraviolet light, scratch coding the cipher into the coins, setting the watch to the frequency only a few people ever knew, altering the photograph not once but twice, splitting fingerprints across 2 iterations, and then finally placing everything inside a wallet built to carry secrets so gently it could be mistaken for forgetfulness. But the most remarkable detail is this: the wallet was not left in a hidden alley or a guarded site. It was left at Gate 9, a public place, a place where anyone could find it. Someone, you whisper, wanted this discovered, but only by someone patient enough to listen to the quiet parts. The clerk nods slowly. So what is the wallet pointing to? You look down at the assembled evidence, the scratches, the codes, the frequencies, the dual images, the false names, the fabricated company, the impossible call. Not a single identity, but a pattern. Something or someone built from contradictions. A mirror. Maybe you say quietly, the wallet isn't describing a person. Maybe it's describing an idea. The clerk tilts their head. What kind of idea? One that cannot be traced, you whisper. Cannot be confirmed, cannot be owned. One that can move between identities without ever belonging to any of them. The clerk's voice lowers. A ghost agent. You nod. Not a ghost as in the supernatural. A ghost as in a person who exists only in the spaces between documentation. Someone whose identity is not erased, but never fully written. A person who can only be known through fabrication. The clerk closes the folder gently. So the wallet is the only record of them. Not a record, you murmur. A silhouette. You stand slowly, letting the realization settle across you like soft snowfall. If the wallet is fabricated, then so is the story it carries. And if the story is fabricated, then it was crafted for someone to interpret. The question that follows you into the corridor feels almost like a whisper from the wallet itself. If someone created a perfect puzzle of contradictions, then what truth were they waiting for you to assemble, and why now? You arrive at the evidence office with a strange calm already resting in your chest, as if you've walked here in step with something that has been trying to catch up to you for days. The corridor feels quieter than usual, the morning light softer, the air somehow gentler against your skin. When you enter the room, the clerk is standing, not sitting beside the table, their hand lightly resting on the edge of the wallet, as though anchoring it to the world. They look up at you, and in their eyes you see a truth they have just begun to accept. We think we know who the wallet belonged to, they say. But their tone tells you immediately this is not a revelation. This is an uncertainty that has finally found its shape. You walk closer. The wallet lies open like an old book whose pages have been shaken out of order. Beside it, the clerk has placed several documents, copies of surveillance logs, administrative reports, fragments of personnel files so heavily redacted they look like silhouettes cut from memory. You recognize the handwriting samples, the fingerprints, the photograph's dual impressions, the pressure-coated napkin marks. They form a mosaic that refuses to resolve into a single face. The clerk takes a breath. There was a real agent, they begin softly. A real identity. Someone who operated during that period under a name we aren't cleared to speak. Their file is practically non-existent. Just fragments. But the fragments, they gesture to the evidence. They match. Match is too strong a word. You both know that. What they mean is something more delicate. The fragments approximate something. They echo. They reflect. They resonate the way a person might see their outline in rippling water. You lift the top sheet of the file. The redactions turn most of it into a night sky of ink, but a few words remain. Operational flexibility. Identity mutable. Non-fixed signature patterns. Then one line stands out, its ink-faded but legible subject, capable of adopting documented identities without possessing their documentation. A soft, almost amused breath escapes you. So they mirrored identities, you murmur. The clerk nods. Not stolen identities. Reflected ones. Borrowed impressions. Enough resemblance to operate without detection, but never enough to be recorded. You set the sheet down gently. The idea forms inside your mind with the slow inevitability of dawn. The wallet, with all its contradictions, is not a biography. It is not a puzzle meant to be solved. It is a portrait painted in fragments, each one capturing an angle, a gesture, a shadow of someone who refused to exist fully in any one form. Someone whose identity was always a mirror. You pick up the fingerprints. Side by side, the first and second impressions still carry that uncanny shift, the subtle bending of loops and ridges. Now they feel less like an anomaly and more like a truth, not a malfunction, not intentional alteration, but a byproduct of a person who never fixed themselves long enough to be captured. You feel a serenity settle into you the way a realization sometimes arrives, not as shock, but as understanding. Of course the prints shift. Of course the handwriting appears in Prague, and then again on a grocery list. Of course the photograph presents two impressions of the same moment. Of course the watch syncs with a frequency used by only a handful of operatives whose work required them to move between names without keeping any. The clerk places another sheet before you, this one a typed note from an analyst decades ago. The paper is thin, the ink faded to the color of old soot. Across the top is a simple line: subject's identity functions as an echo. You touch the page lightly, as though afraid you might disturb the fragile idea it contains. They weren't a double agent, you whisper. They were a reflection agent. The clerk's eyebrows lift. Reflection. Yes, you murmur. Someone who enters an operational environment by reflecting the expectations placed upon them. Someone whose identity becomes whatever others assume it to be. The clerk leans back slightly, their expression shifting from confusion to something closer to awe. Like a mirror. A mirror that walks you, say, softly. And with that, the entire story of the wallet rearranges itself in your mind, like a constellation clicking into place. The non-existent business card. The engineered wallet from the prototype batch. The hidden blueprint. The map with invisible ink embassy marks. The coins carrying a fragment of a cipher. The listening bead. The watch aligned to a forgotten frequency. The photograph developing twice. The silent call from a number that never existed. None of these objects point to a fixed identity. They point to an operative trained to inhabit uncertainty itself. A person who would never give a single traceable answer. A person who moved like fog across borders, whose existence was not an error in the system, but a tool of it. The clerk gestures to the photograph on the table, the second print, where the figure on the left appears more defined than before. We think this may be the real person, they say. Their voice is soft, almost reverent, or as close as the camera could get. You look at the face, or rather the suggestion of it. Even now it refuses definition. The edges hold, but the features resist. You have the eerie sensation that if you looked away for long enough, the expression would shift again. You rest your fingertips against the image. It feels like touching a memory you never lived. What happened to them, the clerk asks, and the question hangs between you like a distant radio signal fading in the winter air. You don't answer right away. The truth feels too soft for certainty. You imagine the operative stepping away from the archway, blending into a crowd, walking through a border checkpoint, without ever presenting a document. Or perhaps they vanished, deliberately dissolving the mirror once its reflection was no longer needed. Then another thought enters calmly, quietly, without asking permission. What if you say gently, this wallet wasn't left behind by mistake? What if it was left behind because they were finished? The clerk inhales slowly. Finished with what? With being a reflection, you whisper. The idea settles into the room like dust lit by sunlight, visible only when the angle is right. The operative may not have been chased. They may not have been lost. They may simply have chosen to stop existing in the way they once did. The wallet, a curated archive of contradictions, may have been their way of leaving a silhouette behind without revealing a face. A non-identity leaving a non-confession. You return the photograph to the table and close the folder gently. Every clue feels calmer, now softened by understanding. The contradictions are not problems to solve. They are features of a life lived between truths. The clerk watches you carefully. So what does that make the wallet then? A farewell, you murmur. A quiet one. The clerk nods, their expression serene. You move toward the window. Outside, the day has brightened, but softly, as if trying not to disturb the stillness inside the room. A woman helps her child with a scarf. A man checks his watch. A flock of pigeons lifts lazily from the platform roof. Everything feels ordinary, and because of that, profoundly comforting. As you stand there, the open question comes to you, not sharp, not demanding, just a gentle presence at your side. If the identity behind the wallet was always a mirror, reflecting whatever the world needed to see, then what truth did they hope you would reflect by discovering it? The question stays with you as you turn away, calm as breath, steady as the rhythm of the mystery still unfolding. You return to the evidence office one last time, though you feel the ending long before you reach the door. The corridor is quiet, wrapped in a stillness that feels less like secrecy and more like acceptance. Inside, the wallet rests alone on the table, no longer surrounded by notes or diagrams or theories, just itself, now small and calm, as though relieved to no longer be asked questions. The clerk stands nearby, hands folded gently, voice subdued. There won't be a report, they say. Not an official one. Too many threads, too many maybes. They've decided to seal the file. You nod. You expected this. Some stories don't end by being solved. They end by becoming quiet. You take a final look at the wallet, its false aging, its perfect seams, its contradictions layered like soft echoes of a life that never anchored itself to a single truth. You feel no frustration, only a strange tenderness. The wallet was never designed to reveal answers, only to leave impressions, shadows, gestures, inclinations, traces of a person who lived in the spaces between definitions. You gently close it and return it to the box. The air seems to ease around you the way a room exhales when a long-held breath is finally released. The evidence lamp dims slightly, as if even the light understands that the work is done. You step to the window. Outside, the station moves with slow, quiet purpose. A train glides along the platform, its brakes sighing like wind against snow. A woman lifts her suitcase. A porter hums a tune too soft to hear. The world continues unworried by the mysteries it never knew existed, and in that gentle ordinariness you find peace. Somewhere out there, perhaps far away, perhaps closer than anyone realizes, the person who inspired the wallet's contradictions has already dissolved into their chosen silence. A reflection returned to still water, a life folded neatly into anonymity. Knowing that feels oddly comforting. You turn to leave. The door closes behind you with a soft click, the kind that fades almost immediately into the hum of the station. And just before the quiet settles completely, you let the final thought drift across your mind like a slow passing train. Not every secret is meant to be solved. Some are meant only to be held gently until they fall asleep. Good night.